Hello everyone, very good morning and welcome to Baiju's exam prep. Welcome to the last class on international relations. As you guys remember, we have a few topics left for today, few small topics at the end to wrap up and cover our entire syllabus. So let's begin with India-Russia relations. Let's understand our ties with Russia with special focus on Russia-Ukraine war. We've already covered most of the background in previous chapters. I'll just summarize the background and then we can focus on the current relations that India has with Russia. Again, we will pay special attention to the ongoing war in Ukraine and how it creates challenges for India. Then we'll take a look at European Union, understand the importance of EU. We'll talk about United Nations as well, especially the topic of UN reforms. And we'll also discuss the latest developments at G20 and the BRICS grouping. These are the few small topics we have. So let's try to wrap it up today. As you know, Soviet Union and today Russia, they have been strategic partners for India. In a way, this country has been India's best friend with regard to global geopolitics. Right from India's independence, the Soviet Union has been very friendly towards India. Even when India was non-aligned, when we were strongly committed to the non-aligned movement from 1947 to 1971, when we had refused to choose a side between US and Soviet Union, even then, the Soviet Union was very friendly towards India. The Soviet Union understood why India was following an independent foreign policy. It never enforced itself upon India. We studied under US, under India-US relations, that when India opted for non-alignment and we refused to side with Western democracies, the US never understood India's position. The US even put pressure on India and it assumed that India is acting against American interests. Right? That was America's approach in the initial years. But Soviet Union has been different. Even though India had not aligned with Soviet Union and we were championing the non-aligned movement during the Cold War, Soviet Union remained very close to India and it gave a lot of support to India on key matters. On many key issues like the Kashmir dispute, for example, and even with regard to liberation of Goa, Soviet Union would completely back India's position at the global level. When the Kashmir conflict broke out with Pakistan from 1947 to 1949, Soviet Union supported India's position at the United Nations. Is that clear? Similar support was seen during the liberation of Goa as well from Portugal. To liberate Goa from Portuguese occupation, India had to fight a limited conflict because Goa had to be taken by force. The Portuguese were not ready to decolonize. And India eventually had to fight a limited conflict. We used our armed forces, including the Navy, to push the Portuguese out of Goa. So when the liberation of Goa happened, there was a lot of international pressure on India, especially at the United Nations. This was projected by European powers as India's expansionism. The European powers, they all supported Portugal at the UN. Countries like United Kingdom, they gave backing to Portugal. And they alleged that India was annexing territories. India was expanding its territory. Right? But India's position was supported by Soviet Union, and that is the kind of support Soviet Union kept giving to India. Even during the Indo-China War, even though Soviet Union was a communist country aligned with China, it declared its neutrality during the 1962 war over the border dispute with China. That shows how important Soviet Union has been to India. Right? Even though it itself was a communist power, leading the communist power bloc, and China was on its side, it adopted a neutral position on the border dispute between India and China. Soviet Union has never exercised any kind of negative pressure on India in favor of China over the border dispute. Then following the 62 war, Soviet Union would start supplying weapons to India, beginning with the MiG-21 fighter jets. as India was looking to modernize its armed forces, very quickly Soviet Union became our reliable defense partner. Right? The MiG-21 and the entire MiG series of fighter jets, they remained the backbone of Indian Air Force for many years, and even today, the MiG fighter jets are a mainstay of the Indian Air Force. Right? In the 1965 war with Pakistan, we studied how Soviet Union mediated in negotiating the Tashkent Agreement with Pakistan. Right? The Tashkent Agreement was negotiated in Soviet Union. Back then, Tashkent was in Soviet Union itself. And Soviet Union again acted neutrally between India and Pakistan to bring this war to an end, to bring the 65 war to an end. But the biggest turning point in the relationship was in 1971, when the US had become hostile to India during the liberation of Bangladesh war. That is where Soviet Union became a true friend of India, a long-lasting strategic partner of India. As we have studied in previous chapters, Prime Minister Indira Gandhi delivered a diplomatic masterstroke to counter the American pressure on India, where US was favoring Pakistan in the conflict. Indira Gandhi abandoned non-alignment. India essentially moved away from its non-aligned principles, and we sought the direct support of Soviet Union to withstand the American pressure against India. As US naval forces were pushed into Bay of Bengal to threaten India, right? India signed a historic treaty with Soviet Union, that is the Treaty of Peace and Friendship. With this treaty, the Soviet Union became a strategic partner for India. It guaranteed the defense of India, guaranteed military support to India to counter the American pressure on India. So we have studied this under India-Bangladesh. We understood how important the Soviet support was to help India win this war and break Pakistan into two parts. The Soviet support was critical in the liberation of Bangladesh. So from here onwards, India, Soviet Union would become very, very close partners across several domains. Post 1971, extremely close strategic relations developed in the defense domain. It became the biggest source of defense imports for India. As you know, most of our defense platforms, weapons and equipment that we have, even today, they are largely of Soviet and Russian origin. So Soviet Union would help in the modernization of the Indian Army, the Indian Navy, and the Indian Air Force. It would also provide support to our nuclear program and even the space program of India, which had started by 1970s. Soviet Union became a key partner in backing our initial stages of the space program. It even lifted the first Indian astronaut, Rakesh Sharma. Right? Rakesh Sharma went to space on a Soyuz spacecraft of Soviet Union. It gave direct support to India in the development of launch vehicles and satellites. More importantly, it gave direct support to India in the development of nuclear weapons and in establishing our nuclear program. When the whole world was targeting India, putting pressure on India for not signing the Non-Proliferation Treaty, the Soviet Union bypassed this pressure and kept giving support. And it's reported that Soviet Union even gave covert support to our nuclear weapons program, meaning it secretly helped India in the development of nuclear weapons as well. So this has been the incredible relationship between the two sides. But of course, 1991 delivered a major blow to this relationship, because by then communism had declined in Europe. Soviet Union itself collapsed, thus bringing the Cold War to an end. The Cold War came to an end with the complete disintegration of the Soviet Union. So as Soviet Union collapsed, India lost a close friend. We lost a strategic partner, and we lost the most important support at United Nations. But fortunately, the successor state of Soviet Union, which is Russia, continued the strategic partnership with India. Even though Russia was not as strong as the Soviet Union, we did manage to continue these close relations even with Russia. So essentially, Russia replaced the Soviet Union and continued the close military strategic partnership with India. Now, let me just explain what kind of military equipment and platforms we have procured from Russia. What kind of sensitive technologies has India got access to from Russia? For example, if you look at the defense sector, if you look at our defense imports, the Sukhoi 30 fighter jets, along with the entire MiG series of fighter jets, they have been pivotal in modernizing the Indian Air Force from MiG-21 to MiG-27 to MiG-29, right? For many decades, these MiG fighter jets, they have been the backbone of Indian Air Force. And we procured the Sukhoi 30 MKI, one of the most advanced fighter jets, right, which provides us air dominance in South Asia. The Sukhoi 30 is known for its capabilities, including its ability to deliver nuclear weapons. It's one of the platforms through which India can deliver nuclear weapons. The Sukhoi 30 MKI has become the backbone of Indian Air Force, right? Then the T-90 battle tanks, which has been inducted into the Indian Army. It has increased the firepower of the Indian Army. It's one of the most advanced battle tanks that is in our arsenal. Then the BrahMos cruise missile, which is a joint project between India and Russia. As you know, BrahMos is one of the world's fastest cruise missiles, and it's also known for its accuracy. The BrahMos can be very useful in precision attacks, to carry out precision strikes against enemy positions, or even to target terror camps that are hidden in forests and behind mountains. The BrahMos can be a capable weapon, and this has been a joint project between India and Russia. Is that clear? Russia has even supplied diesel submarines, diesel and diesel electric submarines, to strengthen the Indian Navy. And in fact, it had even supplied a nuclear-powered submarine called INS Chakra to train the Indian Navy in operating nuclear-powered submarines. See, recently we inducted the Arihant class of submarines, the INS Arihant, which is an indigenously developed nuclear-powered submarine. So to make the Indian Navy ready to operate nuclear-powered submarines and to give enough training in operating nuclear-powered submarines, we needed a training vessel. We needed a nuclear-powered submarine to train our naval soldiers. This is where Russia stepped in. It leased INS Chakra. It gave INS Chakra on lease, which is a nuclear-powered submarine. No country would share this sensitive technology. We studied in a previous class that AUKUS group between Australia, UK and US, they've recently signed a similar deal where UK and US are going to share nuclear submarine technology with Australia. Such a sensitive technology was shared by Russia to India many years ago, right? When India was about to induct INS Arihant to help the Indian Navy in training, INS Chakra was given on lease to India. Even the aircraft carrier that we have, INS Vikramaditya, it's a Soviet aircraft carrier. It's an old Soviet aircraft carrier which was decommissioned, right? We procured it from Russia, refurbished it, upgraded it, and it was the sole aircraft carrier for India until INS Vikrant was recently inducted. Now India has a parallel indigenous program for aircraft carriers. But even there, Russia is helping us in helping in the development of technology and materials for aircraft carriers. So now that we have an indigenous program, right? Before that, we didn't have aircraft carriers. We did have a single aircraft carrier, but most of the time it would be out of service. We had INS Virat and INS Vikrant before, but those were old, outdated aircraft carriers. So Russia stepped in here and gave INS Vikramaditya to India which for many years was the only aircraft carrier which was operational with the Indian Navy. Right? Now with indigenous program taking off and INS Vikrant being inducted, right? We will have multiple aircraft carriers going forward, and Russia is a key supporter of India in the field of naval technology. In the field of naval technology, Russia is a key supporter of India. We have even procured naval boats, advanced naval ships like stealth frigates and missile boats, several naval vessels which is there in our arsenal. They're of Russian and Soviet origin, right? So as you can see, across all three armed forces, be it the Army, Navy, or Air Force, they've all been very dependent on Soviet weapons and Russian weapons. Even in the civilian nuclear domain, Russia has constantly backed and supported India. Today, it is executing the Kundankulam nuclear power plant in coastal Tamil Nadu to increase India's nuclear capacity to generate electricity. Right? In the civilian nuclear domain as well, Russia is a major supporter of India. As we studied in previous classes, when India carried out the Pokhran tests in 98, Russia was one of the few countries which did not criticize India's nuclear tests. It did not join the Western countries in imposing sanctions on India. It did not impose sanctions on India. It bypassed the sanctions imposed by other countries and continued the close relations with India. It did not condemn India's nuclear tests along with France and Israel. And that shows the importance of this special relationship that we share with Russia. Right? Today, we have even procured the S-400 air defense missiles. It's an advanced air defense system. Right? It's been a recent procurement. Recently, Russia has supplied S-400 missiles, which is part of an advanced air defense system that strengthens India's air defense against China and even against Pakistan. And also, please remember, Russia has been very careful to ensure that it doesn't supply similar weapons to China and Pakistan. For many years, Russia was such a close partner to India that it always wanted India to have the edge. It wouldn't sell the same equipment to Pakistan and sometimes even to China. Certain military technologies have been refused by Russia even to China, but given to India. So that again shows how closely Russia has strengthened our security interests in the region. We elevated our relationship to the strategic partnership level in 2010, and it has supported our entry into all the export control regimes. Russia supported our entry into Australia Group, Wassenaar Arrangement, the Missile Technology Control Regime, and it continues to support India's entry into the Nuclear Suppliers Group as well. In the last class, we had studied what these export control regimes are, how US and others are also supporting India. Russia is also a supporter of India's entry into all the export control regimes. Is that clear? Then even if you look at our space program, Russian Space Agency, Roscosmos, has always collaborated with ISRO in sensitive space technologies as well. Space technologies are critical and sensitive because they're closely linked with missile technology, right? And Russia has been a great supporter in the space domain as well. It has helped in development of our launch vehicles, in development of satellites, in sharing key technologies, including the cryogenic engines, which were denied to India. The US tried to derail our cryogenic program in the 1980s and 1990s, right? Because cryogenic technology can be applied for military purposes as well. So when US was targeting our cryogenic engine program, it was trying to derail our space program. Russia was constantly backing our space initiatives. It even shared cryogenic technology with India. Now it is supporting our Gaganyaan mission, the ambitious human space flight program of India, right? The first mission to put Indian astronauts in outer space. In the upcoming Gaganyaan mission, Russia is helping India in training astronauts. I don't know if you know this, the Indian Air Force has already chosen the first batch of astronauts for Gaganyaan mission, and they have been undergoing training in Russia from the last 2 to 3 years. It is also helping India in the field of space medicine, space clothing, and also in the development of the space capsule, which is going to hold the Indian astronauts. When you're deploying humans in orbit, right? These technologies are critical. Space medicine, space clothing. You need special developments in the field of medicine and clothing to protect your astronauts in orbit, to deal with the harsh conditions in outer space. Then developing the space capsule itself requires a lot of technological advancement, and Russia is a pioneer in this domain, right? Russia has built its own space station as well. It previously had a space station. Russia has sent several astronauts into orbit. It's part of the International Space Station program as well. So India can learn a lot from Russia, and that is where Russia can help us with the Gaganyaan mission. Going forward, in the coming decades, India has ambitious plans to scale up nuclear reactors in the country. Right? We want to generate more electricity from cleaner sources to reduce our emissions and focus more on nuclear energy as well. We are trying to cut down our dependency on fossil fuels, right, to tackle climate change. And we are focusing more on clean renewable energy, be it solar or wind, and especially nuclear energy as well. So here Russia will play a key role. It plans to build several nuclear reactors in India in the coming days. Recently, we have signed a contract to develop and produce AK-203 assault rifles, which is going to become the primary weapon which will be provided to Indian armed forces. I'm sure you would have heard about the AK series of assault rifles like AK-47, AK-57. These are some of the most preferred assault rifles in the world, right? The Indian forces, the Indian armed forces, and even paramilitary forces, they are looking to switch to a new assault rifle, which is AK-203, which is of Russian origin. And this is going to be domestically produced. It will be produced in India. Basically, Russia is transferring technology. It's transferring the technology to India so that the assault rifles can be domestically produced in India. In Uttar Pradesh, near Amethi, right? A defense factory has come up to indigenously produce the Russian AK-203 assault rifles. In the coming years, we'll be producing lakhs of these assault rifles, which will become the main primary weapon for our armed forces and paramilitary forces. So this clearly explains how important Russia is to India as a defense partner with regard to our defense imports. Russia has firmly remained at the top. Since the Soviet days, the country has been the top defense supplier to India. Is that clear? Now, let me talk about the Eastern Economic Forum and India's interest in the Russian Far East. This again shows how close India-Russia are, even in the economic domain. India-Russia do have strong economic relations. Even though our bilateral trade is not very high, there are some key investments we have made in each other's countries. And there are some key imports that we make in other sectors. Russia is a major supplier of oil and gas, and it is blessed with plenty of fossil fuel resources in the Far East region. All right, in the Russian Far East, there are plenty of resources present, but Russia has been struggling with investments. If you look at the map, you will get to know where the Far East region is located. See, Russia is such a massive country. It stretches across multiple time zones from Europe to Pacific. And this here is the Far East region. You might have heard about the Siberia region, the Siberian Peninsula, right? The Siberia region is what is called the Far East of Russia, or the Russian Far East. This region is blessed with natural resources. You have hydrocarbons, you have diamond, coal, and many other precious resources are present here. But the problem for Russia is that the region has a very small population. Very few people live in the Siberia region because of the harsh conditions in Siberia. Because of its proximity to the Arctic. See, this here is the Arctic region. All right. So because of its proximity to the Arctic, the climatic conditions in Siberia is very harsh. You have minus 30, 40 degrees Celsius temperatures here. You have permafrost conditions where the top layer of the soil is completely frozen, right? So in such a harsh environment, in such cold, extreme cold conditions, you will not find a large population to be present. Even though it's a massive region, the size of Far East region is far bigger than India. If you look at the territorial area of Russian Far East, it's bigger than the size of India. In such a big region, you have a very small population, but the region is blessed with resources. So this is where Russia wants investments from other countries. Russia is looking for investments from other countries. It wants foreign companies to be involved in harvesting the resources of the Far East. So for this purpose, Russian President Putin organized a summit called Eastern Economic Forum in 2019. India was one of the countries which was invited, and Russia has been seeking investments into the Far East through Eastern Economic Forum. So India has been a major participating country here. Prime Minister Modi traveled to Russia in 2019. He attended the Eastern Economic Forum and announced an investment of $1 billion to develop the Far East region of Russia. In fact, we already have many companies, Indian companies, which are invested here. For example, India's ONGC, OVL, India's ONGC Videsh Limited, already has investments in the Sakhalin gas reserves towards the Sakhalin region, which is closer to Japan. Just look at the map here. This here is the Sakhalin region, the Sakhalin and Kamchatka region of Russia. Here, there are plenty of hydrocarbon reserves. You find fossil fuels, you find oil and gas reserves. So Indian companies like OVL have invested in this region. We have a major investment here where we procure Russian oil and gas to meet India's energy requirements. There are other Indian companies like Tata Power, which have invested in a thermal coal mine in the Kamchatka Peninsula. Is that clear? Since India needs high quality coal to power thermal power plants, Indian companies like Tata Power are very active here. There are other companies working in the sector of diamond and few other minerals as well. There are Indian companies which are operating out of the Russian Far East. So to further drive this relationship with the Russian Far East, India announced a special investment of $1 billion as a concessional loan to Russia as a line of credit. Is that clear? This focus of India on the Far East is often labeled as Act Far East policy of India. Just like we have Act East policy, which focuses on Southeast Asia, East Asia, and the Pacific. Similarly, this focus of India on the Russian Far East, and the focus we are giving even to the Arctic region, this is often called the Act Far East policy of India. Is that clear? We have made big investments here In fact, we were one of the first countries to open a consulate at Vladivostok in 1992. Vladivostok is a major port in Siberia, which opens towards the Pacific. And Vladivostok is a important point for connectivity with India. And as part of the Far East policy, we have launched a new link to connect Chennai with Vladivostok. We are trying to create shorter routes to Russia because we have studied in previous chapters that the traditional route to Russia is a very long route. Currently, if you have to send goods from India to Russia or Russia to India, they take the long route, which is via the Atlantic, through Mediterranean, through Suez Canal, Red Sea, and then reaches India. This is a very long route. If you send goods through this route via Europe, it will take anywhere between 45 to 60 days. This increases the cost. It increases the time involved in transportation. This is a major hurdle in our trading relationship. So we are trying to create a shorter maritime link by connecting the Chennai port with the strategic Vladivostok port present here in Siberia. This is where Vladivostok is located. This is where Vladivostok is located, where India already has a consulate. We were one of the first countries to set up a consulate here. So we are trying to create this maritime connection that would link Chennai with Vladivostok, creating a shorter route between India and the Russian Far East. It will complement the INSTC project which we are pursuing. It complements the land route, the shorter land route we are pursuing through INSTC corridor with Iran and Azerbaijan. Is that clear? So all these investments of India with Russia, it's designed to increase our presence and influence in the North Pacific and also in the Arctic. Today, the Arctic region has acquired a lot of significance. I hope you know that in the Arctic, the Northern Sea route has started opening up because the polar ice caps are melting due to climate change. New shipping routes are opening up in the Arctic region. And Arctic region is also blessed with immense resources. So there are big powers competing for influence in the Arctic. Many big powers are rushing towards the Arctic, and they're trying to deploy their militaries as well in the Arctic in order to establish their dominant influence. They're all trying to capture their resources in the Arctic. In fact, there is a grouping as well which governs the activities in the Arctic region. It's called the Arctic Council. The Arctic Council is an organization, it's a grouping of all the Arctic countries. Arctic countries like US, Canada, Russia, then all the Scandinavian Nordic countries like Sweden, Finland, Norway, Denmark. Is that clear? All these countries are members of the Arctic Council. That includes Greenland and Iceland as well, right? All these Arctic countries present in the Arctic region, present above the Arctic Circle, they're all members of the Arctic Council, which regulates the activities in the Arctic. Is that clear? In this important council, India has become an observer state. Because other powers like China, Japan, United Kingdom, they all were playing a role in the Arctic by becoming observers to the Arctic Council. They had already got observer status. China especially has been paying more attention to the Arctic. It has been deploying its navy as well to counter the naval presence of US, Russia, and other countries. So now that China also is interested in the Arctic and increasing its influence, it's important for India as well to counter this this Chinese influence. So this is where we depend on Russian support. Russia can be a great partner for India to increase our influence in the North Pacific, where China is very dominant, right? From China to Korea to Japan, in this region, in this entire region, China is very influential. So by working with Russia and by investing in the Far East and by creating this maritime link with Vladivostok, even India is becoming a major player in the North Pacific. Even we are present here countering Chinese influence, and we are even reaching out to the Arctic region with Russian cooperation and with cooperation with other countries. India also has become an observer to the Arctic Council. Please note down this point, it's very important. India also has become an observer state to the Arctic Council, and we work with like-minded countries. For example, Norway. Norway has helped India to set up research stations in the Arctic. India has a very active polar research program. Just like we have set up research stations in the South Pole, in the Antarctic, we have research stations in the Arctic Circle as well, where Norway is a key partner for India. With the help of Norway, India has set up research stations such as Himadri. Himadri is an Indian research station present in the Arctic region, in the Svalbard region of Norway. Is that clear? We have even set up an underwater observatory called IND-ARC. IND-ARC is an underwater observatory India has set up in cooperation with Norway. Recently, we have come out with the Arctic policy. We have come out with the Arctic policy as well to define India's focus in the Arctic region and to define our priorities in the Arctic. So this is where Russia can play a big role. Russia being an Arctic power, it's a country which is member of Arctic Council. It's right next to the Arctic region, right? It can definitely push Indian interests and help us counter the Chinese influence. It can keep us in the competition in the Arctic as the Northern Sea route has started opening up. So this is how Russia has become extremely important to us in several key domains, and that's what defines the strategic partnership today, right? So now, what is the biggest challenge we are facing? All right, that is the question. Now that you have understood the broad relationship, what is the challenge we are facing today in the relationship? There are two issues, if you ask me. There are two major challenges that we are facing. One challenge is India's proximity with US and growing proximity with Western countries in general. See, India has become very close, not just to US, but even to France and Germany. We are very close to United Kingdom, very close to Australia. Correct? We have strategic partnership with all of them. We have very close defense military relations with all of them. And what India has done is that we have diversified our defense imports. We have reduced defense imports from Russia and started procuring more from US, France, and Israel. So what happens because of this? Because of this diversification of Indian defense imports, the Russian share has reduced in the Indian defense market. See, there is a problem as well here. The problem is Russian military equipment is often seen as outdated. It is also seen as expensive, and there are high chances of failures. Russian technology in general, Soviet technology as well, is considered as outdated. Many of Soviet Russian platforms, they fail. That's why the MiG fighter jets became very problematic. They became known as the flying coffins because of frequent crashes which were killing Indian pilots, right? So when it comes to Russian equipment, we have faced many problems and challenges. It has been difficult to service them, to maintain them. We have spent a lot of money in just repairing Russian and Soviet equipment. And Russia has misused its dominant position and it has often charged very high prices for India. If you look at INS Vikramaditya, the price was almost doubled by Russian negotiators. Initially, the price where we started and the final price where we bought INS Vikramaditya, the price was doubled by Russia because India was dependent solely on Russia. This is a problem we have faced. This is one issue we have faced with Russian defense equipment. They're often expensive, outdated technology causing failures and accidents where we are forced to spend more on repairs and maintenance. That is why India sought out better technology. We diversified our defense relations, focused on US, France, and Israel as they have advanced military technology. Especially in the last 20 years, in the last 2 decades, after US got closer to India from 2001 onwards, right? We have procured a lot of equipment from US. We studied that. Later, under European Union, I'll point out what equipment we have procured from France. We studied India, Israel as well. You know what kind of equipment we have procured from Israel. So as their defense share has gone up in our defense market, the Russian share has reduced, and Russia does not like this. See, even today, Russia is the top defense supplier to India. Even today, Russia is the top defense supplier. US, France, Israel come later. They are in the top 4. But Russia is not happy that its share is getting reduced. Its market share in the defense market of India is getting reduced day by day as we get closer to Western countries. So this is one issue which is affecting our ties. The other related concern here is that India's closeness with US and Western countries is diametrically opposite to the nexus between Russia and China. As you know, Russia, China, both of them, they have a Cold War going on with the Western countries, right? Russia, China have aligned together to oppose the West, to oppose US. They are championing groupings like SCO and BRICS to create an alternate global structure, right? Groupings like Shanghai Cooperation Organization and BRICS are championed by Russia and China. And India is a member of these groups as well. We are one of the important members of SCO and BRICS. So we are working closely with Russia and China at these groupings. At the same time, India is also part of Western initiatives like the Quad grouping, like I2U2 Summit, Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, etc. We even work closely with countries like Japan, with whom Russia has boundary issues, territorial issues. I hope you know this, that Russia, Japan, they have a boundary dispute over Kuril Islands in the Pacific. Near Kamchatka and Sakhalin region, towards the Far East region of Russia, you have a group of islands called Kuril Islands, which historically belonged to Japan, but it was captured by Soviet Union during the World War. Since then, Russia has maintained control over most of the Kuril Islands and it's claimed by Japan, and it remains a standing territorial dispute, a maritime dispute between Russia and Japan. France, Germany, UK, they've all joined US in imposing sanctions on Russia. Even China has been targeted with Western sanctions, right? So there is an intense geopolitical rivalry between them, but India is in between these powers. On one hand, we are working with US and Western countries. On the other hand, we try to be close to Russia as well. This is not appreciated by Russia. Russia doesn't like how close India has become to US and Western countries. So it has led Russia to counter India by getting closer to Pakistan and China. This has always been our challenge. How do we balance these different powers? As India has gotten closer to US and Western countries, Russia also obviously has gotten closer to China and even to Pakistan. In the last few years especially, Russia has considered supplying weapons to Pakistan. It's the first time Russia has thought about it. Previously, I told you, Russia would never supply weapons to Pakistan to help India maintain the lead, to maintain the advantage. Now, Russia is considering military exercises with Pakistan. Given that China, Pakistan already have a strategic nexus, It's only natural for these powers to come together. And for India, this is always a challenge, a dilemma, where we work with groupings like SCO, groupings like BRICS. On the other hand, we work with Quad, I2U2, and others, which are led by Western countries. So this challenge of balancing the Western powers and Russia on the other side has become a major headache for Indian diplomacy. This has even aggravated, it has further aggravated because of the Ukraine war. Thanks to the Russian aggression against Ukraine, right, the violations that Russia has committed, it has created a very difficult challenge for India, right? And this is what we should understand right now. This is where you should focus upon. The last topic here, the last point. You need to understand what is happening in Ukraine, why Russia has attacked the country, and what has been India's position on the conflict. What challenges has it created for Indian diplomacy? That's the last point I want to discuss under this chapter. See, I have mentioned in previous chapters, when discussing Central Asia especially, that Soviet Union during the Cold War was a massive country, a very large country, which included all the Central Asian countries and many East European countries. When Soviet Union was at its peak, the influence of communism had spread across Eastern and Central Europe. Even countries like Poland, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, they were all under Soviet influence. They were all communist powers. They represented the Eastern Bloc. All the communist powers led by Soviet Union, they represented the Eastern Bloc during the Cold War period. The Cold War period from 1948 to 1991, this period saw the emergence of a major divide and a literal physical divide in Europe, where East Europe was divided from West Europe. Look at all your West European countries. They were all democracies. They were all aligned with the US, the leading democratic power, pushing capitalism. If Eastern Bloc countries were pushing communism and socialism, Western democracies led by US and European countries, they were pushing democracy and capitalism. This intense geopolitical rivalry during the Cold War had led to the formation of the Iron Curtain, which you can see over here. This physical barrier which had come up in Europe, it divided Europe. Both sides had deployed military troops here, right? Fenced most of the area as well, digging trenches. This marked the physical division of Europe during the Cold War. Germany was divided between West Germany and East Germany. Berlin was divided between West Berlin and East Berlin, right? So Soviet Union remained very dominant, very influential across the Eastern Bloc. Especially after the Soviet Union collapsed, after the Cold War came to an end, even though Soviet Union collapsed and all these communist countries, they shifted towards democracy, right? The problem was Russia always saw East Europe and even Central Asia as its primary area of influence. This was only natural on Russia's part. Just like India sees Indian Ocean as our traditional area of influence, right? Every country would have its own traditional area of influence. Similarly, Russia, which was the successor state to Soviet Union, it saw that the former Soviet republics, which broke away from Soviet Union, right? Like Ukraine, Belarus, then many other countries like Georgia, right? And all your Eurasian powers like Azerbaijan, Armenia, Central Asian countries. These are all at one point part of Soviet Union. So as they broke away from Soviet Union, causing the collapse of Soviet Union and the end of the Cold War, Russia always believed that it was still the dominant influence across Eastern Europe and Central Asia, that is across Eurasia. Russia believed that this is its primary area of influence, which has to be protected from any Western interference. See, this is where I want you guys to understand that the Cold War never really came to an end. Many experts believe that the Cold War didn't really end with the collapse of Soviet Union. In fact, it turned into a new Cold War. A Cold War 2.0 had begun between US and Russia, where Western countries were constantly trying to undermine Russian influence. Western countries, they saw the collapse of Soviet Union as an opportunity. Very quickly, they expanded their influence towards the East, towards Eastern Europe, in order to counter Russian influence and undermine Russian influence. This was never liked by Russia, and Russia has always resisted it. The problem began with the expansion of NATO. NATO is a military alliance of the Western Bloc. During the Cold War, right? The Western countries led by US and even Canada and all your West European countries, they had formed a military alliance called NATO, right, which started functioning from 1949 through the Washington Convention, through the Washington Treaty that was signed between these countries, these Western democracies. They formed NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which was a military alliance, a military club. So to counter Soviet Union and the Eastern Bloc during Cold War period, these Western democracies had formed a military alliance called the NATO. Now, one of the core principles of NATO under Article 5 of the Washington Treaty is the principle of collective defense. This is one of the core principles of NATO, which means all NATO members are obligated to provide military support to each other if one of the member countries is attacked by a non-NATO country. Imagine if a NATO country is attacked by a non-NATO country, then all the other NATO members, they will all treat this as an attack on their own country. And they will collectively organize the defense of the country by declaring war against the aggressor. That is the kind of military alliance that was formed through NATO. So Soviet Union was always concerned and worried about NATO. Later, after Soviet Union collapsed, Russia was obviously concerned about NATO. This has been a rivalry, a kind of conflict between the two powers, the two power blocks. As Soviet Union collapsed, NATO saw an opportunity in Europe and it quickly expanded its membership. It brought new countries under the grouping. Is that clear? Several countries in Central Europe and Eastern Europe, and even some former Soviet republics, which were part of Soviet Union, they were all brought under NATO over a period of time. Parallelly, the European Union, the major regional grouping, also started expanding into Eastern Europe. So on one hand, a military grouping called NATO was expanding, adding all these countries which were under Soviet influence, and European Union, which was a political, economic and security grouping of Europe, started expanding eastwards, which was adding all these former Soviet republics and other Central Eastern European countries which were under Soviet influence. They were all joining these groupings. They were becoming members of NATO and European Union. Russia saw this as a direct interference from the Western countries. Russia saw that US and European powers were targeting, countering Russia, and they were trying to limit Russia's influence. Just look at the expansion of NATO here. Your Baltic states, these are the Baltic countries which face the Baltic Sea over here. These were former Soviet republics. They were part of Soviet Union, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania. They've all joined NATO. which means if Russia, let's say, hypothetically, were to attack Estonia or Latvia or Lithuania, all the NATO countries will have to come to defend them, because that is the principle of collective defense. Former communist countries like Poland, Czech Republic, Slovakia, Hungary, Romania, Slovenia, Croatia, Montenegro, Albania, North Macedonia, and Bulgaria. All these countries in the Balkan region, which is over here, this is the Balkan region. All these countries in Central and East Europe, they all joined NATO. Is that clear? Many of them became members of European Union as well. This is where concerns started rising for Russia. But the final blow was the attempt of Western countries to bring Ukraine into their fold. They were pushing Ukraine to join NATO and European Union. And there were several developments from early 2000 till 2014, which led Russia to get aggressive against Ukraine. Essentially, what you're seeing in Ukraine today is a direct result of the strategic conflict and competition between Russia and the Western powers. What US and European countries did was that they tried to lure Ukraine. See, Ukraine had a pro-Russian government. All right, Russia is always obsessed with Ukraine because even during Soviet period, Ukraine was a key component of Soviet Union. It's quite a large region, blessed with resources. Even today, Ukraine is a major agricultural country, a major producer of agricultural commodities. It's a major producer of various defense and military platforms. Many Soviet nuclear reactors, military factories were present in Ukraine, right? And Ukraine also has a considerable Russian-speaking population of Russian ethnicity, especially in eastern Ukraine. So Russia has always believed that Ukraine should be firmly under its influence and control, like Belarus. Belarus has always been an ally of Russia. It has never switched allegiance towards Western countries. It has always been loyal to Russia. Russia expected the same from Ukraine. For many years, there was a pro-Russian government in Ukraine, but gradually, there was a change that was happening. There was a massive protest and revolution, which is often called the Euromaidan protests, where Ukrainian people protested against Russian control and Russian influence. Remember, we studied the Eurasian Economic Union. Under Central Asia, we studied Eurasian Economic Union. When Russia proposed this economic grouping of Eurasian countries, Russia badly wanted Ukraine to be a part of it. Russia wanted Ukraine to be a key member along with Belarus, Kazakhstan, and others, so that Russia could cement its geopolitical and economic influence in the region and counter the Western influence. But in Ukraine, there were massive protests. It was a revolution led by the people, the Euromaidan protests. This led to the toppling of pro-Russian government. The pro-Russian government was thrown out, and a pro-Western government took shape in Ukraine in 2014. So Russia had reasons to believe that Western countries had meddled in Ukraine. They had interfered. This is true to an extent. The CIA of the US, the CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency, and even European intelligence agencies, they did play a role in Ukraine in supporting these protests to target the pro-Russian government, to remove the pro-Russian government and try and install a pro-Western government in Ukraine, so that they could pull Ukraine into NATO and European Union. So when this change happened, right, when Ukraine aligned with the West in 2014, and it became very clear and it became very evident that Ukraine might seek membership of NATO or European Union, that is where Russia got aggressive against Ukraine. Is that clear? Ukraine refused to join the Eurasian Economic Union. It refused to be a part of this economic union supported by Russia. Instead, it started showing interest towards NATO and European Union, which triggered anxiety for Russia. Because in other NATO countries like Poland, Western troops and Western missiles have already been stationed as part of the military cooperation between the NATO countries. See, this is another obligation of being a NATO member. You should give a space for Western troops, even American troops and American weapons and missiles to be stationed in your country, right? In Poland especially, the US not only deployed some of its troops, but air defense missile systems of US were being installed in Poland and in other Central and Eastern European countries. Even in Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, right? Western troops and Western air defense missile systems have been installed, which basically counters the Russian nuclear arsenal. If ever there were to be a nuclear war between Russia and the West, and Russia were to launch nuclear weapons, they could be brought down by the missile systems, anti-missile systems, the air defense systems that NATO countries have deployed across this region. Basically, they have created a shield designed to contain Russia, designed to limit Russia's nuclear options. This is what triggered Russia from many years. That's why I said the Cold War never really ended. It just acquired a new form. So Ukraine, when it rejected Russia's advances and started getting closer to NATO and EU, right? It got closer to West European countries and US. That is where Russia retaliated. In 2014, Russia annexed the Crimean Peninsula, the strategic Crimean Peninsula that you see here, right? It's located in the Black Sea, next to the Sea of Azov. This is where Sevastopol port and naval base is located, which is a major naval base and port of Ukraine. But Russia annexed Crimea. In retaliation, Russia annexed Crimea in 2014. And along with that, it sponsored separatist outfits in the Donbas region of eastern Ukraine. In eastern Ukraine, there is a strong Russian population that speak Russian language, who are of Russian ethnicity. So in these provinces of Donetsk and Luhansk, Russian intelligence agencies, they sponsored a separatist rebellion. They supported the ethnic groups here, triggered an armed separatist movement, causing major destabilization of Ukraine. So the Russia-Ukraine war did not begin just last year. There is a history behind it. It goes all the way back to Cold War, right? It goes all the way back till 1990s, and how Ukraine has slowly shifted towards Western countries, which pushed Russia to get more aggressive. Russia, being an authoritarian country under Putin, has reacted aggressively, broken all the norms and international laws, and it not only annexed Crimea, but it sponsored a separatist war in Ukraine. That is when Western countries retaliated by imposing sanctions against Russia. They even removed Russia from G8 and made the grouping into G7. The G7 that you have today, which is a grouping of advanced industrialist economies, it was previously G8 until 2014. Even Russia was a member. Russia was also a member of the G8. Russia was thrown out in 2014 after it annexed Crimea. Western countries targeted Russia with sanctions for its annexation of Crimea and the sponsorship of separatist war in Ukraine, and they removed Russia from G8, and G8 became the G7 grouping. Since then, there have been heightened tensions between Russia and Western countries over the Ukraine issue. Is that clear? And in 2021, it was reported that Ukraine might soon become a member of NATO and maybe even European Union. Right? This is where Russia decided to get even more aggressive. Russia launched a major military mobilization to threaten Ukraine from 2021 itself, lakhs of Russian troops were mobilized and deployed across the borders here in the eastern parts of Ukraine. And Russia mobilized troops even with Belarus and mobilized troops here in the north. And since Crimea is controlled by Russia, even from the south, Russia surrounded Ukraine. Lakhs of troops were mobilized towards the northern, eastern, southern borders of Ukraine that increased tensions in the region. Because Ukraine was apparently considering membership of NATO and European Union. So to prevent this, Russian President Putin, he declared a special military operation in February 2022. He said that Ukraine has become a hub of pro-Nazi elements and anti-Russian elements, and in the name of protecting Russian interests and protecting Ukrainian people, right? Russia has said it wants to topple the Ukrainian government, which is aligned with Western countries. Thus began the Russian invasion, which is definitely an illegal invasion. No country can threaten the sovereignty of another country like this. It's prohibited under international law. UN Charter mandates all the UN members to respect the integrity and sovereignty of other countries. Such a full-fledged attack, invading a country, occupying others' territory, is prohibited under the UN Charter and under international law. So Russia became the aggressor because of Western interference, and Russia broke all the international norms. Right? Putin has been notorious in that regard. He disregarded all the international norms, attacked Ukraine, and began a full-scale military invasion of the country. Everyone believed Ukraine would collapse within days because Russian forces are vastly superior. In fact, Russian troops, they made very rapid advances from the north, south, and east. And everyone thought that Ukraine might completely collapse and Russia might even completely annex Ukraine. But surprisingly, wars don't go as planned. Wars never go as planned. Today, Western countries have organized tremendous support to Ukraine. They have given billions of dollars in assistance. They have supplied key weapons and technology, and even shared intelligence and provided military training to allow Ukraine to counter the Russian invasion, to resist the Russian invasion. So over the last 1 year, Ukraine has been quite effective in countering and resisting the Russian invasion. In fact, Russian troops have retreated from many locations. Their invasion from the north failed. Russia tried to protect its troops in the northern invasion from Belarus, but Ukraine defended better. It defended the capital Kiev and pushed back the Russian troops from the north, pushed them back towards Belarus. Even in southern and eastern Ukraine, right? Ukraine has managed to push back the Russian troops, even though Russia has captured some territories. If you look at the map here, Russia has gotten control of this stretch of territory from Mariupol to Donbas region. The separatist areas of Donetsk and Luhansk, they have been fully annexed by Russia. A so-called referendum was also held here, where apparently the people voted to join Russia, and now Russia claims these regions as its own territory. But no country recognizes this annexation. No country in the world recognizes the annexation of these Ukrainian territories by Russia. But Russia has declared the independence of Donbas region. It held a so-called election, a so-called referendum, where apparently the people here, where separatist war was going on, have voted to join Russia. So Donetsk and Luhansk have been claimed by Russia. It has captured Mariupol and this whole part of southern and eastern Ukraine. And essentially it has connected Crimea directly with the Donbas region. This whole region here has come under Russian control. But Ukraine is managing to push back. It's resisting the Russian occupation, especially at places like Kharkiv. Ukraine has fought legendary battles. It has delivered battlefield defeat to Russia, and that's quite significant. Today, Ukraine has scaled up the attacks and it is relying on drones and covert operations to deliver devastating hits to Russia. Multiple Russian ships have been sunk near Crimea. All right? Advanced drones are being used, aerial drones and even underwater drones are being used to mount major attacks against Russian cities and Russian targets. So today, Ukraine has responded quite effectively. Again, Western support is critical here for ensuring the response of Ukraine. US especially, along with Japan, UK, France, Germany, and many others, they've all given direct backing, supplied billions of dollars in funds, supplied key weapons. They've supplied artillery systems. They've supplied even assault rifles, drones, satellite links, shared technology, shared intelligence, and provided military training as well. Right? And they've even supplied battle tanks to strengthen Ukraine's resistance against Russia. Apart from this direct support, Western countries have targeted Russia with crippling sanctions. They've cut off Russia from the global banking system, the SWIFT platform, which provides for financial transactions between banks. They've cut off Russian institutions, Russian banks from the SWIFT payment gateway. They have blocked most of Russia's foreign transactions. Most of Russia's foreign assets have been frozen. Russian investments in other countries, they have been frozen by the Western countries. Assets linked with Putin and other top officials of Russian government and armed forces, they've been completely frozen by the Western countries. Right? Russian companies have been prohibited from continuing their operations. So Western countries have delivered a significant economic hit to Russia. They've definitely delivered a significant economic hit to Russia through these sanctions, which has cut off Russia from the global banking and financial system. Right? And along with that, Western countries have used platforms like UN to bring up resolutions against Russia, calling for action against Russia. Even at the International Criminal Court, at the ICC, an arrest warrant has been issued for Putin. Russia and Putin, they have been accused of committing war crimes and committing crimes against humanity based on the large-scale human rights violations that have happened. And ICC, the International Criminal Court, which was set up through the Rome Statute, has issued an arrest warrant for Putin. This is the state between Russia and Western countries today over the Ukraine conflict. Now, this division creates a major challenge for India. India got caught in between when Russia invaded Ukraine. See, on one hand, obviously, we don't support such invasions. We have a strong commitment to the UN Charter. We believe that the integrity, sovereignty of other countries should be respected. We know what Russia did was wrong. We know Russia has committed war crimes and human rights violations. But we can't ignore the fact that Russia is a key strategic partner and it's been an all-weather friend for India. During India's most difficult times, be it the Kashmir conflict with Pakistan, border dispute with China, liberation of Goa, our nuclear program, our military modernization, in all these key issues of India, Russia has been the sole supporter of India. This is a time-tested relationship. You can't ignore that overnight. Yes, idealism says that we should look after human rights. We should support Ukraine as well. But in geopolitics, you have to get realistic. Sometimes idealism will not work. You need to be more pragmatic, realistic in your foreign policy. That is exactly what India has done. Based on the principle of strategic autonomy and the independent foreign policy of India, India has tried balancing Russia and the Western countries over the conflict. How did we do this? How did we strike the balance? First, till date, we have never directly criticized Russia for the war. Not even once has India criticized Russia for the invasion. All right? Second, we have abstained from all the UN resolutions where voting was required. At all global bodies, even at UNESCO, at UN Human Rights Council, at World Bank, at all these platforms, many resolutions were brought against Russia to criticize its invasion and call for global action against Russia. In all these resolutions, India has abstained from the vote, which means we're indirectly supporting Russia. It's a balanced position. We are not directly supporting them. We haven't voted against it, but we have abstained from it, showing our balanced position on the conflict. And more importantly, India has bypassed the Western sanctions. We have completely bypassed Western sanctions. What we did, we went ahead and completed the procurement of S-400 Triumph missiles. After the war began, Russia started the delivery of S-400 to India, and we procured them from Russia. But more importantly, we procured Russian oil, which was being sold at a discounted price. As Russia was desperate to make money, right, because the sanctions was having an impact. Russian oil and defense sector had lost a lot of revenue because its exports had been hit due to the war in Ukraine, due to the sanctions imposed by Western countries. So India bypassed the sanctions and Russia was selling oil at a discounted price, and we became the largest buyer of Russian oil. Today, India is one of the biggest purchasers of Russian oil, and Russia has no wonder become the second largest oil supplier to India. It has even overtaken UAE, Saudi Arabia, and other major oil suppliers to become the second biggest oil supplier to India. Right? We have fully bypassed the American sanctions, the Western sanctions, continued our trade, and we have worked out alternate payment mechanisms. We have tried paying for Russian oil by using either UAE's dirham. Sometimes we have relied on the Chinese currency as well. The Chinese yuan also has been used. And we have even worked out a rupee-ruble payment system. We have tried to settle transactions through a rupee-ruble payment system. And we have allowed Russian entities to set up Vostro accounts where we will make the payments in Indian rupees to offset the trade balance for other Russian imports from India. All right, so such alternate payment systems have been created by India to bypass the crippling Western sanctions. So that way, India has truly supported Russia as an all-time friend. But however, to maintain our ties with Western countries, we have called for an end to the war. India wants an end to the war, and India wants a negotiated settlement. During last year's G20 summit at Bali, Prime Minister Modi, he met Putin, and he urged Putin that this is not the time for war. The world is already dealing with the pandemic and other economic challenges. So he said, this is not the time for war. The war has to come to an end. So we haven't criticized Russia. We haven't voted against Russia ever. We have abstained from all the votes, bypassed the sanctions, been a true friend for Russia, just like Russia has been there for India. But the only difference is that we are urging Russia to end the war. We are urging Ukraine as well. We are urging both the parties and the global community to work out a negotiated settlement. Through talks and negotiations, we want the war to come to an end because it has had a huge impact on all the countries. Even India's exports and imports have been hit. Global supply chains were disrupted. Right? The war had a huge economic impact. especially with regard to food security. Because Russia and Ukraine, they are major agricultural countries. They are major exporters of wheat, barley, sunflower seeds and oil, soybean, corn, etc. These food shipments were affected through the Black Sea. That's why the Black Sea Grain Initiative was negotiated by UN and Turkey to create a safe passage for Ukrainian agricultural exports. Recently, Russia has quit this initiative as well. Is that clear? So the war has reached a stalemate. The war continues. Ukraine has fought back, resisted the Russian invasion, and the war continues, and it looks that it will be dragging. It looks like it will be dragging for many more months without an end in sight. So the war has definitely had a huge economic impact and a geopolitical impact, not just on India, on the whole world, right? So India wants the war to come to an end, but we want this through talks and negotiations, not through violence. So what we have done, we have in a way given support to Western countries as well, their position, by urging an end to the war. But we haven't blamed Russia, not criticized Russia even once. We haven't voted against Russia. We have bypassed all the sanctions, continued our imports from Russia, thus supporting Russia economically. Is that clear? This is the dilemma we face, and I think India has done quite well in balancing the conflicting interests. Right? When you follow an independent foreign policy, this will always be a challenge. And honestly, India has done a fine job in balancing Russia and Western countries. Got it? So this is where I end my discussion on Russia. I hope all the key points are clear. If you have this basic understanding, it's more than enough. Next, we'll look at some organizations. We'll look at European Union, UN, and a few others. This is largely factual, right? So I'll just take you through the basic facts, but I want to focus on few topics where analysis is required. With regard to EU and UN, there are some issues, some topics which we need to focus upon. That is where we'll focus our attention, but we'll quickly go through some of the basic facts as well, which is relevant for your prelims. All right. In the meanwhile, if you have any doubts, any questions, please raise them, please bring it up. I'll take them at the end of the session. Today we'll be ending early. Maybe by 8:30, 8:45, we'll try to wrap up. All right. So bring up all the questions. I'll take up the questions at the end. Now let's start with European Union. Let's understand what is European Union. What kind of relations does India have with European Union? The EU is one of the most successful regional groupings in the world. As a regional organization, it has done very well to unite the region and bring the region together. We have studied groupings like SAARC, BIMSTEC, IORA, even ASEAN, Gulf Cooperation Council, etc. Right? By now, you know what is the purpose of a regional grouping. Any regional grouping or regional association tries to build political relations, economic relations, and sometimes even security relations. So the EU is one such organization, which is a political and economic union of several European countries. Today, there are 27 countries after Brexit. Previously, there were 28. But UK quit EU following a referendum that was held in 2016. The UK had a lot of differences with the EU. UK believed it was contributing more to European Union and incurring losses. So there was a popular political movement to quit European Union altogether. So in UK, it became a major political issue and a referendum was held, a direct election, where majority of the people voted in favor of Brexit. That is Britain's exit from EU. So now Britain's exit has been completed. Britain has completely quit the organization, and today you have 27 member countries. It's a major political economic grouping, and the best part about EU is that they have created a truly single market. They have established one of the best free trade areas in the world that provides for free movement of people, free movement of goods, services, and investments. Is that clear? They've established the Schengen zone, They have created the Schengen zone, where they have removed hard border controls. Hard border and passport controls are removed in the Schengen countries. So citizens of these countries, which are part of the Schengen Agreement of European Union, they can move from one member country to another freely. They have created a system of open borders, truly open borders. They don't need visas to enter another country. They can go to another country to settle and study and work and to start a business. For example, a French citizen, right? He can easily travel to Germany. They don't go through any immigration checks. They don't need a German visa, right? As part of the Schengen zone, a French citizen can go to Germany to study, right? Similarly, from other EU countries, like let's say Italy, an Italian can come to France to set up a business, right? Someone from Belgium can go to, let's say, a country like Austria to work and settle down in the other country. So a truly open border system has been created. Hard border controls have been eliminated, which means relaxed security checks, no checking of goods, no imposing taxes, no custom duties, no import duties, and passport immigration controls have been eliminated. This provides for the free movement of people, goods, services, and as well as investments. A true single market has been created. All right? They have even adopted a common currency, the euro. Some of the countries, not all members, but some of the EU members, around 19 members, have adopted euro as their currency, which means they've given up their economic sovereignty, their sovereignty over monetary policy. See, any country, right, any government and central bank, they desire to have control over monetary policy, to control their currency. That is the primary tool to control your economy. That is the source of power for the government. But EU countries have foregone this power. They have given up their control over monetary policy for a common currency, which is regulated by the European Central Bank. This is quite remarkable, right? This is what allows EU to thrive as an economic region. They even coordinate their laws and policies in several areas related to trade, agriculture, and even security. They come out with common laws and policies. For example, data protection, regulating artificial intelligence, regulating social media firms, right? Laws and policies related to trade measures, fisheries, agricultural trade, and transport communication, privacy, all these issues, right? They have a common law, common policy in place. Even in terms of security, with regard to some foreign policy issues, national security issues like counterterrorism, right? In these major issues as well, they have a common policy where they work together, they coordinate with each other. This is the remarkable achievement of EU. No wonder the region is home to some of the most developed countries in the world. This is the biggest achievement of EU. That is why it was recognized with the Nobel Peace Prize in 2012. Because what EU has achieved is truly remarkable. See, just few decades ago during the World War period, this continent was ravaged and destroyed by wars and conflict, right? France and Germany have fought multiple conflicts. Many European countries, they have been involved in decades of conflict and war. Such a war-ravaged continent today has been united. It's one of the most stable, progressive, advanced regions in the world. It's an industrialized, developed region today, and they've even solved all the basic socio-economic issues. Most of the member countries here, they have a very high human development index. On the HDI index, majority of the members here, they score very high, which means they are developed, advanced economies. And the credit goes to this organization, the European Union. Essentially, European Union united the continent. It has reduced the chances of conflict, reduced tensions, and created prosperity. That is why it was recognized with the Nobel Peace Prize for its efforts in stabilizing Europe. Now, let me give you some basic facts about the background here. Just a quick summary. You don't have to mug up all these points. Just be aware of this, mainly for your prelims. We'll look at the structure of the organization and then talk about India's ties with the EU. See, in 1952, after the World War had come to an end, some of the Western European democracies, they came together to form an economic community. Led by UK, France, then Netherlands and few others, the coal and steel community was formed so that they could collaborate to revive the coal, steel and iron industries. These were the industries which had driven the Industrial Revolution in the 1800s. These were the industries which had brought prosperity to Western Europe before the World War. Now that the countries were looking to rebuild their economy, they were focusing on reconstruction because their countries were destroyed by the World War. These Western democracies realized that they have to collaborate, they have to work together. They have to pool their resources, their technology, create common supply chains so they can thrive together. So in 1952, the European Coal and Steel Community was formed, which led to the signing of Treaty of Rome in 1957. This is the origin of European Union. See, the EU in its current form was formed much later. All right, EU was established much later. But before that, there was an organization which brought the countries together. It is the predecessor of EU. All right. First was the European Coal and Steel Community in 1952, where some of the Western European countries worked together in the coal and steel industry. Due to the success of this initiative, they signed the Treaty of Rome in 1957, through which they established the European Economic Community. This is seen as the predecessor of European Union. Is that clear? So Belgium, France, Italy, Luxembourg, Netherlands, West Germany, they were the ones who signed the Treaty of Rome. These West European democracies signed the Treaty of Rome and established a common customs union and even started collaborating in the field of science and technology, particularly in the nuclear sector. Euratom was established for nuclear research, for atomic research. Today, EU is a major leader in the field of science and technology, right? That's why I'm pointing this out. So through Treaty of Rome, this grouping was created in 1957, and this treaty was in force until 1992. It was under the treaty that European Economic Community was functioning as a customs union of the region. Basically, it had created free trade between these countries. All right. Then in 1985, the Schengen Agreement was signed to create open borders, to eliminate hard border controls and passport controls, and provide for free movement of people between these countries. This brought the region even closer. Economic relations improved, cultural ties improved, enmity was getting reduced day by day. And by 1990, we saw the collapse of communism and the end of the Cold War. In world history, you will study how the Berlin Wall was brought down in 1989, which marked the start of end of communism. It was the beginning of the end of communism. Germany got reunified. By 1989, 1990, West and East Germany were reunified with the collapse of Berlin Wall. Right? The Berlin Wall was destroyed, which divided Berlin into two parts. So West and East Germany, they reunified, and many communist countries across Central Eastern Europe, they started moving away from Soviet influence. They abandoned communism, shifted towards democracy. Eventually, in 1991, the Soviet Union itself collapsed and disintegrated, which marked the end of the Cold War. So as the Cold War ended and new democracies were taking shape in Central and Eastern Europe, immediately European countries, they saw an opportunity. The West European countries, they decided to expand the membership. That is why they replaced the Treaty of Rome with the Maastricht Treaty of 1992. Because the whole geopolitics of Europe was changing. The very map of Europe had changed. Within 2-3 years, Germany had reunified. Many former communist countries had moved away from communism, and Soviet Union collapsed. The Iron Curtain was finally lifted. Is that clear? New countries were born in Europe. In Balkan region, Baltic region, and Eastern Europe, new countries had been born. So now the West European countries, they saw an opportunity here. So they decided to expand this grouping, the European Economic Community, and they replaced the older treaty, the Treaty of Rome, with the Maastricht Treaty of 1992. It was through this treaty that European Union was established in 1993. With this, the EU was formed to focus on further economic integration of the region. And very quickly, euro currency was adopted, a common currency, which today is the second largest reserve currency in the world. And EU started expanding by adding new members. All the new countries which had formed, which were former Soviet republics, they were all added as EU members. You can see the map here, right? Most of these countries from Central, Eastern Europe, the Baltic region, Balkan region, many of them were added into European Union, thus expanding the membership of EU. This marked the eastward expansion of EU, just like there was an eastward expansion of the NATO. So as EU brought new members under the group, it required a new treaty. That is why the Maastricht Treaty was signed and European Union had been established. So all the new countries, they started joining this grouping. And finally, Maastricht Treaty was also replaced with the Lisbon Treaty. Today, Lisbon Treaty is what governs the functioning of European Union. All the aspects of EU, the trade relations, the movement of people, how to quit EU, right? Just like Britain did. All the provisions related to its governing, its functioning is contained under the Lisbon Treaty. So it came into force in 2007, replacing the earlier Maastricht Treaty. And since then, EU countries have come out with common laws and policies, even in the field of foreign affairs and security. They're not just collaborating in the economic domain with regard to their trade policies. They are even collaborating in the field of foreign affairs, national security, and other key laws and policies. They even created a new position, the President of the European Council. The President of the European Council acts as the head of the European Union, right? Providing leadership to this organization, political leadership to the organization. Recently, when we held the G20 summit in Delhi, the President of European Council was also invited along with all G20 leaders, right? Because EU is a member of G20. So this group today has become a formidable economic, political, and security grouping of the European region. It is made up of 7 primary organs. It has 7 key institutions. You have the European Council. The European Council is the highest decision-making body. It basically guides the EU and identifies the priorities of European Union. All right, the European Council, it acts like a guiding body. It's the highest decision-making body. It prioritizes the issues for the member countries, the organization, and it consists of all the prime ministers and presidents of the member countries. It is headed by the President of the European Council. The Lisbon Treaty created this position, the President of the European Council. The President heads the Council along with all the head of states, head of governments of the other countries. The prime ministers and presidents of all the members, they are the members of this council. That is why it is the highest decision-making body. So the leaders meet, the prime ministers, presidents, they meet under European Council to identify the priorities, to lay the guidelines and chart a path for the organization. All right. In a way, if you want a comparison with Indian polity, European Council is like the cabinet, the union cabinet. Cabinet is the highest decision-making body in the country that brings all ministers together, the Council of Ministers together. It's something similar. European Council is bringing all the leaders together. All the prime ministers, presidents are brought together under the president of the European Council to take all the big decisions, to give approvals, to guide the organization and identify the priorities for the organization. All right, it's like the cabinet of the Indian government. Next, it has a legislature as well. There are two legislatures, in fact. The Council of European Union and the European Parliament. They act as the legislative bodies. Basically, they enact laws, they pass the laws, they control the budget of EU. Just like Indian Parliament enacts laws and controls the budget, similarly, these two legislative bodies, European Parliament and Council of European Union, they bring out the laws, enact the laws, they control the budget of EU. All right, Council of European Union is like Rajya Sabha. It doesn't have direct elections. In Rajya Sabha, right, there are indirect elections and there are nominations. Similarly, Council of European Union consists of the concerned diplomats. The diplomats who are acting as representatives of their concerned countries, they are part of the Council of European Union. All right. So it's like the Rajya Sabha, where there are no direct elections. But European Parliament is like your Lok Sabha. For European Parliament, there are direct elections where European citizens, they cast a vote, they elect their MPs to the European Parliament. So together, these two bodies act as the legislature, enacting laws and controlling budget of the European Union. Is that clear? Next, the European Commission. This is the executive organ. It's like the executive organ of the state that implements the policies approved by European Council, the laws enacted by the European Parliament and the Council of European Union. It's the implementing body, right? It's the executive arm of the European Union. Then there is a judiciary to settle disputes between the member countries. There is a Court of Justice of European Union. There is a central bank, the European Central Bank, to regulate euro, to come out with the monetary policy for Eurozone countries. Around 19 members have accepted euro as their currency out of 27. So the monetary policy for euro countries is regulated by the ECB, the European Central Bank. And finally, you have a Court of Auditors. Just like we have a Supreme Court, the RBI and the CAG. Similarly, EU also has a Court of Justice, European Central Bank, and a Court of Auditors. These are the 7 primary organs of EU, and you should remember them. You should know what their functions are and what is their composition. Right? This is very important for your prelims. Now, what kind of relations does India have with European Union? That is the big question. What focus areas exist in this relationship? What initiatives do we have? And do we have any issues in the relationship? Right? This analysis part is what is relevant for the mains exam. Now, if you look at the focus areas, obviously, the top priority is trade and investment. The EU is one of the largest trading partners for India. If you take EU into account, like a country, like US or China, EU even overtakes China and US to become one of our largest trading partners. So the trade relationship here is extremely important, especially for Indian exports. Europe is a massive export market for India. Indian agriculture, Indian farmers, Indian industries, especially MSME industries, they are heavily dependent on the European market. India's manufacturers, even our services industry, especially IT and software, they are heavily dependent on the European market because it's a massive export destination. India also is one of the top trading partners for EU, and both sides have a lot of investments in each other's jurisdiction. There are many Indian companies that have invested heavily in European market, from TCS to Wipro to Infosys, right? And even other major companies like the Tata Group, Adani Group, Reliance, right? Then the Mittal Industries, right? There are plenty of Indian industries that have made millions and millions of dollars of investments in European countries. We have created jobs in the European market. Is that clear? Similarly, Europe is a major source of FDI into India. European countries bring a lot of foreign investment. France, Germany, Netherlands, Denmark, right? Then even Italy and many other countries here. They are major investors in India. There are hundreds of European companies operating here, creating jobs in India, right? So there is a lot of FDI flow which happens along with the large trade volume. So that is why there is a proposal for a free trade agreement. India and EU have proposed an FTA called BTIA, Broad-Based Trade and Investment Agreement. The BTIA is a proposed FTA. Please remember this. There is a proposed FTA between the two countries, between the two sides. But unfortunately, the talks have not progressed. These talks have been going on for more than 10 years. Initially, some progress was made, but many issues have come up, which is preventing India from going ahead with the deal. Even European countries are not convinced about this proposed FTA with India. So currently, negotiations are going on, but we aren't seeing much progress. The major issue is that EU is made up of developed countries and they expect their standards, which cannot be met by a developing country like India. Remember, when we studied RCEP, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, I'd explained what problems India had with RCEP. We were worried about the flood of cheaper imports from major manufacturers like China. We were worried about synchronizing our laws related to environment, labor standards, competition laws, IP laws, intellectual property laws, following their quality standards, hygiene and phytosanitary standards. Because it's difficult for a developing country like India to achieve those higher standards in trade. This has become a roadblock with European Union as well. Developed countries of European Union, they expect very high sanitary, phytosanitary standards, which becomes a barrier to trade. In the agricultural commodities, like the fruits and vegetables and cereals that we export, they expect very high quality and sanitary standards, hygiene standards. The medicines that we export, they expect very high quality standards. Such high quality sanitary and hygiene phytosanitary standards cannot be maintained by developing nations like India. If we try to impose them on our farmers and manufacturers, it will increase the burden on them. It will increase the cost for them. The same with IP laws, intellectual property laws. Developed nations want a strict implementation of intellectual property laws, but developing countries cannot do that because it will increase the prices of essential commodities, including essential medicines, which are life-saving medicines. Right? So developing countries, they are more relaxed on these policies to support the weaker sections. But developed countries don't understand that view because they are focused on quality, they are focused on promoting the industries, right? They want a bigger market in India. They want a bigger market share in the Indian market. So we are worried that their companies will dominate and our domestic producers can't compete with them, right? So to protect our domestic industry, India has taken a step back and we haven't signed this FTA. Even European countries are not convinced. So both sides have hit a deadlock and they're not able to resolve this. But efforts are being made to finalize this trade agreement, the broad-based trade and investment agreement. If it is worked out, it will be a very big boost for trade and investments between the two countries. Is that clear? We also want easier visa norms for Indian students and workers. This is another request from India. But European countries are worried that if immigration norms are relaxed, illegal migration will increase from India. Already, European countries are dealing with the burden of illegal migration from India. I don't know if you know this. Every year, thousands of Indians are leaving the country and entering Europe illegally. They take many illegal, risky routes to enter Europe. So, Indian illegal migrants have become a nightmare, a headache in Europe. So, European countries are signing mobility and migration partnership agreements. Mobility and migration partnership agreements are being signed with India between various European countries that will allow legal migration. That is, students who are qualified, workers who are skilled and qualified, who can contribute to their economy, they are given a legal route to enter Europe, but others can be prevented. Illegal migrants can be checked. So we have started signing these agreements with UK, with Austria, and with many other European countries. We signed recently one with Greece as well. Mobility migration partnership agreements are being signed so that we can convince them that illegal migration can be tackled. We can convince them that they should give us relaxed norms for our students and professionals who are contributing to their economy, right? So this could pave the way for the free trade agreement as well. So we are making some progress, but there are some issues which has prevented us from signing the free trade agreement. All right. Now, looking at other sectors of cooperation, there is very close cooperation in the education sector because Indian students, they go to European countries like UK, France, Germany, Netherlands, right? And many more. It's a preferred destination for Indian students. Even in Denmark, in Sweden, Finland, right? Even in Italy. Is that clear? In Belgium, across European countries, you find hundreds and hundreds, thousands of Indian students studying in European universities. So education, that to higher education, is a focus area. Next, climate change and achieving the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Promoting sustainable development, reducing emissions, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, adopting clean technology, especially solar and wind, even nuclear. This is a focus area, right? We do work together at the UN, at the Climate Change Convention, to implement the goals of Paris Agreement, to achieve the goals of Sustainable Development Goals of 2030. So that is where we collaborate. Then in the security domain, we have built strategic ties with many countries, especially in the field of counterterrorism and defense cooperation. With countries like UK, France, Germany, and even Italy and others, we have very close defense partnership. We even conduct joint military exercises with them, right? We have plenty of joint military exercises. We procure defense equipment. India has a lot of defense imports from Europe. We have joint military exercises. We have intelligence sharing, intelligence cooperation between our intelligence agencies. And we collaborate in the field of countering terrorism and as well as tackling organized crime. Tackling organized crime, cyber crimes, money laundering. All these are priority areas for cooperation between India and Europe. Then, of course, we have close cultural ties. There is a very strong Indian community across European countries. Right? The Indian diaspora is very strong. They form a cultural bond and they're all contributing to the economy of European countries. They abide the law. They respect local customs. They have integrated with European society and they form a direct bond, a link between India and European region. So we do have very strong cultural exchanges. We collaborate in the field of law enforcement and especially in the field of science and technology, in the domain of nuclear technology, space technology, and even advanced domains like particle physics, then quantum technology, quantum mechanics, then AI, right? In all critical emerging technologies, robotics, then Internet of Things. In all these key areas of technology, we are working closely with our European partners. Countries like Denmark, for example, they are leaders in clean energy, right? That is something we would like to share. We would like to procure from them. Countries like France, they are major defense manufacturers, and we want to procure more defense equipment from France and others, right? So there is very close collaboration between India and European countries across several sectors. If you look at science and technology alone, India's ISRO works very closely with European Space Agency. Our Navik satellite system, the IRNSS, Indian Regional Navigation Satellite System, that provides for navigational and positional services. It has been augmented with the Galileo satellite system of European Space Agency. Right? European Space Agency has played a role. It has shared some technology from the Galileo system, which is the equivalent of the American GPS. If NASA has GPS, the European countries have Galileo. Russia has GLONASS. Russia has its own global navigation system called GLONASS. China has its own global positioning system called BeiDou. And India has created a regional navigation system called NAVIC or IRNSS, where we have collaborated with European Space Agency, and there is a technology sharing with the Galileo satellite system. All right. Today, ISRO has become the primary option for European companies and European universities to launch small research satellites into orbit. Small satellites like nano satellites, micro satellites, pico satellites, cube satellites. They're mainly used for research and even for basic communication, right? Most of the European companies and universities, they rely on India's PSLV and GSLV, which have become reliable launch vehicles today. India offers one of the cheapest options, right? Our space launches are the cheapest in the world. There's a cost advantage. Today, we have become pioneers in this domain and multiple European companies are approaching ISRO. We have opened up space for private participation, right? There are dedicated entities of ISRO like Antrix Corporation, New Space India Limited, which are encouraging more private participation. So we carry out commercial launches for European vendors at a very cheap cost, at a fraction of the cost. And today India is capturing the space market, the launch market. PSLV and even GSLV is becoming a reliable workhorse, right? It can safely deploy multiple satellites at one go. ISRO has the record of deploying 75 satellites into orbit in one launch, right? So India has become a preferred option here. And even we rely on the European countries to launch our heavier satellites into geosynchronous transfer orbits. Since we still face some challenges in lifting heavier payloads, in the range of 4,000 to 5,000 kilograms, right? And GSLV is not entirely tested as of now. We do have some challenges, even though the recent launches have been successful. When it comes to lifting heavy communication satellites, we have faced challenges in the past, right? So we have relied on European companies like Arianespace to launch Indian heavier satellites into the geosynchronous orbit. So there is that collaboration between us. We help each other in launching our space payloads. In the field of particle physics, there is very close collaboration between Indian institutions and European projects like the CERN Super Collider, the Large Hadron Collider at CERN, which is a massive facility on the borders of France and Switzerland. It's around 27 kilometers in diameter. It's a circular particle physics accelerator, which is trying to detect dark matter, dark energy, to find the God particle, the Higgs boson particle. It has seen some success as well. It's a global project, right? To understand the very origin of the universe, to understand the Big Bang, to answer questions about dark energy, dark matter, black holes, etc. Right? Advanced particle physics research is taking place here at CERN, and Indian institutions like BARC and TIFR are directly involved in the project. We contribute funds and our scientists are also involved. It's a collaborative project. So Bhabha Atomic Research Center, Tata Institute of Fundamental Research, and many others, right? They all collaborate with such European projects. Have you heard of ITER, International Thermonuclear Experimental Reactor? This is a groundbreaking project coming up in France. It's coming up at Cadarache in the south of France. It's another global initiative involving multiple countries to master nuclear fusion. Currently, all the electricity we generate through nuclear reactors, it is through nuclear fission. Is that clear? This is the technology that we have currently mastered. Currently, most of the nuclear reactors in the world, they rely on nuclear fission, where you split the atom. Splitting the atom is much more easier. You can control that reaction. All right? But nuclear fusion is what releases more energy. This is the reaction taking place in all the stars, including your sun. Nuclear fusion can provide immense energy, permanent source of energy, and it could solve the global energy problem. But the challenge is, it's very difficult to control nuclear fusion. So there is an experimental project coming up in France called ITER that involves European Union, China, India, Japan, Russia, South Korea, and US. All the 7 countries are sponsoring this project and working on it. Indian institutions, Indian companies are involved in this key project, along with US, China, Russia, and others. And recently, there has been some success. Initially, some basic success has been seen in controlled nuclear fusion. In the last 1 year itself, there have been 2-3 trials where, for a fraction of a second, nuclear fusion reaction has been achieved. All right? If we are able to solve this problem, if we are able to control nuclear fusion, right, this could solve the global energy problem. You don't have to rely on fossil fuels after that. It can give you unlimited supply of electricity. That is the potential of nuclear fusion. Right now, the challenge is in controlling it. Right? So that is why ITER is one of the most important global projects, and India is one of the key participants in this project, along with European Union. Then across the field of defense and security, we share very close ties with European countries. Terror groups like Islamic State, Lashkar-e-Toiba, Al-Qaeda, Jaish-e-Mohammed, they all pose a common threat. Both sides are equally concerned about the terror ecosystem present in the Afghanistan-Pakistan region. It's a common concern. Terror groups like Islamic State have carried out multiple attacks across Europe, in Paris, in Berlin, in Belgium, in UK. ISIS has carried out many attacks in the last few years. Right? There are ISIS modules in India, which is a concern for us. Lashkar-e-Toiba and Al-Qaeda have a major presence and have carried out attacks in Europe and, of course, against India as well. So countering these terror groups, stabilizing Afghanistan is a common concern, and we have very close intelligence cooperation between our intelligence agencies. India's RAW and IB work very closely with European partners, with the French intelligence, German intelligence, Italian intelligence, even with UK. Even though UK is not part of EU, even with MI5 and MI6, we have very close security relations and we share intelligence with each other. We have procured many important defense platforms, right? From prelims point of view, you should be aware of this, especially from France and also from UK. We have procured major defense platforms, including the Scorpene diesel electric submarines, which has been inducted under INS Kalvari class. It's an advanced conventional submarine, diesel electric submarine, right? Under Project 75, 6 diesel electric submarines were built in India. France gave the technology, the Scorpene submarine technology was transferred to India, and we built these submarines indigenously at Mazgaon Dock Limited near Mumbai. Most of them have already been inducted into service into the Indian Navy. And we are looking for another order. We want to expand this further. We are looking to procure even more Scorpenes. It might happen very soon. We have procured the Hawk jets from UK, mainly to train our pilots. Hawk is known as an intermediate jet trainer. When you're training fighter pilots before putting them on actual fighter jets, Hawk serves as an intermediate jet trainer. And today it's the primary aircraft with Indian Air Force to train the young recruits, the young pilots. So we procured the Hawk intermediate jet trainer from UK. Then, of course, the Rafale and the Mirage from France. The Mirage fighter jets were procured many years ago, back in the 1980s and 1990s. Right? The Mirage remains a major arsenal. It's part of our arsenal. Right? Mirage is capable of delivering nuclear weapons. It's a platform through which nuclear weapons can be delivered. It's known for its tremendous capabilities in precision strikes. That is why Mirage jets were used in Kargil war to launch precision attacks against the occupied positions of Pakistan. Even during the recent Balkot airstrikes, right? The Indian aircraft which entered Pakistan, it was the Mirage. 12 Mirage fighter jets were used during Balkot airstrikes. So Mirage is of French origin. We have purchased this from France. And now we have procured the Rafale. Rafale has become the frontline fighter jet along with Sukhoi 30. And we have deployed it against China and Pakistan. We are looking to procure the naval variant of Rafale as well. Then we have procured the Jaguar from UK. Jaguar is an older aircraft, but still it has great capability. It can fly very low, very close to the surface, and it can avoid radar detection. And even Jaguars are capable of delivering nuclear weapons if required. So such key platforms have been procured from European countries. Just few days back, the Indian Air Force received the first C-295 transport aircraft, which is designed and developed by Airbus in Spain. I'm sure you would have read this in newspapers. The Indian Air Force is looking to replace the old Avro transport planes to transport equipment and troops. And we are procuring the advanced C-295, which is one of the most advanced transport aircrafts built by Airbus. It's one of the biggest defense deals we have with Spain. We are procuring a total of 56 aircraft, and 16 of them will be produced in Europe. Airbus will make them in Spain and directly supply them to India. The other 40 will be produced here in India domestically. At Vadodara in Gujarat, a plant has come up by Tata Advanced Systems Limited. The Tata Group has a defense arm which has collaborated with Airbus for this initiative. So Tata and Airbus will jointly produce this indigenously in India. The other 40 C-295 aircraft will be produced here in India, which will improve our aerospace ecosystem. We have multiple joint military exercises with UK and France. With France, we have Shakti, Varuna, and Garuda. These are the exercises respectively with our armies, navies, and air force. With UK, we have Ajaya Warrior, Konkan Shakti, and Indradhanush. Kindly remember these basic facts. All these are important for your prelims, not for your mains. Right? In general, for mains, having an idea that we are close defense strategic partners is enough. But the specific facts are more important for your prelims. We even collaborate in anti-piracy missions near Gulf of Aden. And today, we are working together in stabilizing the Indo-Pacific. UK, France, Italy, Germany, they all want to play a bigger role in Indo-Pacific along with India. Is that clear? They want to counter terrorism, counter money laundering, tackle organized crime, tackle drug trafficking and cyber crimes. So this is what truly brings India and EU together. And we do share a special partnership with these countries individually as well. Right? Now, you need not bother about each individual relationship. UPSC will not ask you that. The broad relations we have with European countries and with European Union in particular. All right, this is more than sufficient for the exam. Everything else is current affairs based. You don't have to focus too much on the background, because when it comes to Europe and these regions, it's largely the recent developments that we have discussed, which is more important. Understood? Now, let's see if you guys have any doubts, any questions. Then I'll move to the last topic for today, the United Nations. We'll discuss UN reforms. And I have a few points about G20 and BRICS that I would like to mention at the end. Let's see if there are any questions related to what we have studied. Please give a break. Today, break is not needed. It's a short session. We are not taking it till 9:30 or 10. We'll try to end it quickly. So don't worry. It won't be a long session today. Sundaresh is asking 1 to 8 largest trading partners with India. Which are they? See, you don't have to mug up and remember the top trading partners of India. Just remember the top 3. The top 8, top 10 are not needed. UPSC will not ask you that. And also this number keeps changing every year. Trade is not the same every year. It keeps changing. But top 3 usually are US, China, and European Union. All right, sometimes China is at the top, sometimes US, sometimes European Union. But these are the top 3, US, China, and European Union. If you remember that, it's more than enough. Next, Abhijit is asking, even though Germany, France, Italy are part of EU, their heads of state are participating in global meetings in which EU head is also participating. Why is it so? Why not other EU state heads are doing the same? See, European Union, even though it's a collective group, the other member countries, they retain their sovereignty. Now, let's say you take G20, for example, right? France is a G20 member. Germany, Italy, they're G20 members. Obviously, their prime ministers, presidents will attend the G20 summit. European Union is also a member of G20. That's why the president of EU also participates. EU will not supersede over the sovereignty of the member countries. That cannot happen. Only in terms of trade, some laws and policies and some monetary policies. Only there these countries are coordinating. But in all other aspects, their respective governments have full sovereignty. No one will give up their sovereignty. That's why at global meetings, be it UN, be it G20 or any platform, concerned head of states will participate. Right? They represent their country. EU is also represented. EU is represented as an organization. Right? So both will have a representation. Sakshi is asking, by having relations with both Western countries and Russia, India is not able to become a trustworthy partner for any of them. No, not really. The G20 summit is an example, right? By balancing Russia and the West, we managed to strike a deal. Today, India is positioning itself as a deal maker, as someone who can resolve global issues and bring conflicting parties together to mediate between them and negotiate a solution between them, right? We've actually protected our ties with both the sides. We have good relations with Russia, we have good ties with West, and we haven't allowed the war to affect this relationship. So that way, Indian diplomacy has done a very good job, right? in balancing these conflicting interests, and we have projected ourselves, we have positioned ourselves as a deal maker between these conflicting powers. So we haven't really affected our ties. We have actually strengthened our ties by balancing our position. Santosh is asking why Russia doesn't give us technology of maintaining the jets and aircraft. Russia has given the technology. Problem is it is outdated. Is that clear? Now, Sukhoi, for example, we maintain the Sukhois on our own. But problem is many technologies from Russia, they are a little outdated. Jansi Rani is asking, sir, for IR only current affairs is enough? Obviously, no. Current affairs is most important, but the background is also equally important, right? So both are equally relevant. Atharv is asking, Russian influence over Azerbaijan, why it became hurdle for India as India is close partner to Russia. See, with regard to Azerbaijan, India has a problem. The problem is Azerbaijan has backed Pakistan over the Kashmir issue. If you guys remember, I mentioned this while discussing Central Asia. Azerbaijan has aligned with Pakistan at Organization of Islamic Cooperation. It has supported Pakistan on the Kashmir issue, and this is a major concern for India. Otherwise, we actually had good ties with Azerbaijan. We didn't have any problem as such. But as Azerbaijan has aligned with Pakistan and backed Pakistan on the Kashmir issue, India has a major problem with Azerbaijan. Even though Russia is a good friend of Azerbaijan, India has problems with Azerbaijan. All right. And in the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, which is going on between Azerbaijan and Armenia, we have supported Armenia indirectly. Right. I mentioned this point as well. We have supplied weapons to Armenia. India has become a major weapon supplier. We've supplied radars and even rockets. The Pinaka rocket system has been supplied to Armenia, which strengthens Armenia's military position against Azerbaijan. That is why Azerbaijan and India have an issue, right? And even though both are close to Russia, we do have a problem with Azerbaijan. Santosh is asking, is it necessary to learn the diplomatic information exchange between Swiss Bank and India? Just go through it, not too important. In internal security, we have a chapter on money laundering. There I will discuss money laundering. I'll discuss the foreign banks, how they enable money laundering, right? We'll discuss the aspect of black money. So there we will cover the topic, don't worry. But right now, just go through what kind of banking relations we have with Switzerland and other countries where Indian money is usually siphoned and stored away from India. There is a fear that black money is being stored in many of these banks that provide a lot of secrecy. Just be aware of the issue. We'll discuss that under internal security. Naveen and Pratyaksh are asking about the Canada issue. We discussed this under India-Canada. I did mention this under Khalistan movement, right? Yesterday, in the Hindu analysis, I've had a detailed discussion on India-Canada tensions which are going on. Please go watch that video. You'll get a good understanding of what's happening right now. We'll cover this in the upcoming webinars as well. And more importantly, Khalistan topic is internal security topic, not IR, right? So in internal security, we have a separate topic on Khalistan movement, the threat from Khalistan movement for India. So there we will definitely address the foreign angle, the support the Khalistan elements get in Canada. We'll discuss the India-Canada relations there. That is a more appropriate place to discuss the current issue. Right now, you can go and watch yesterday's The Hindu Analysis on YouTube, where I've covered this topic in detail. I'll cover this again more comprehensively under internal security for Khalistan movement. All right. So guys, these were some of the questions. Now, I would like to come to the last topic for today. I would like to discuss the topic of UN reforms. UN reforms is an important topic for your mains. As far as your mains exam is concerned, UN reforms can come as a question. All right. From prelims point of view, there are some basic facts which I have added in the PPT. I'll just take you through them. But we'll understand what is UN, what is its structure, why India is pushing for UN reforms. These are the three key questions we need to answer. The United Nations was established in 1945 following the Second World War. The main purpose of the UN was to stabilize the world, which was affected by conflicts and wars. The main purpose of UN was to prevent wars, to prevent conflicts, to stabilize the world and bring security around the world. Because the world wars had destroyed stability and peace in the world, right? Today, this organization has 193 member states, right? All 193 recognized countries are part of the United Nations. It's headquartered in New York, and its constitution is based on the UN Charter. The UN Charter is a key document in international law. This is what defines some of the aspects of United Nations, the constitution of UN, its functioning, its governance, and certain aspects of international law is defined under the UN Charter. It's like the constitution of the UN. Like India has a constitution, the UN has a constitution document, which is the UN Charter. And India had played a role in drafting the UN Charter. Even before we became independent, we took part in the UN Conference on International Organization that was held in 1945 at San Francisco, where the UN Charter was drafted and adopted in 1945. Is that clear? Now, you should know why UN was set up. What was the reason? See, before the Second World War, the First World War had happened, the war had ended. The First World War ended with the Treaty of Versailles in 1919 that had set up the League of Nations. The League of Nations, set up after the First World War, was the first major international organization. And one of the primary tasks given to League of Nations was to prevent another world war. The primary goal of League of Nations that was established through Treaty of Versailles after the First World War was to prevent the Second World War from happening, to prevent future wars and conflicts. But as you know, League of Nations failed spectacularly. In fact, many historians argue that League of Nations not only failed to protect peace and stability, but in many ways it contributed to the Second World War. The mistakes of League of Nations played a role in triggering the Second World War. You study this in world history. So given that League of Nations failed in its objective and eventually the Second World War happened, a need was felt for a new organization which could effectively stabilize the world and prevent conflicts. So that is why after the Second World War, it was decided to replace the League of Nations with a new organization. And Franklin Roosevelt, F.D. Roosevelt, the president of US in 1942, he had coined the term United Nations. During the course of the Second World War, he had suggested that there should be a global grouping of United Nations, United countries, where we could deal with global issues and prevent wars and conflicts. So based on this idea, the San Francisco Conference was called in 1945, which was the UN Conference on International Organization. So this led to the drafting of UN Charter, which was adopted, which established the UN in 1945. The goal of UN was to replace League of Nations and effectively prevent wars and stabilize the world, along with achieving other goals and objectives. And India played a key role in drafting this charter. Even though we weren't independent, we did have representation as part of British India. There were Indian representatives who attended the San Francisco Conference. So India has contributed to the UN Charter, and as soon as we became independent, right, we became a member of the UN, the United Nations. If you look at the UN Charter, you will understand what are the objectives of the UN. What is the primary objective? Its prime objective is to maintain peace and security, to prevent wars and conflicts, promote human rights, promote social and economic development, protect the environment, and provide humanitarian aid in case of famine, disasters, and wars and conflict. All these objectives were designed keeping in mind the destruction created by Second World War. The World War had created refugees. The World War had destroyed welfare. There were social and economic problems. The World War and Industrial Revolution had damaged our environment, polluted our environment. So all these are issues, they deserved attention and focus. That is why this organization was created with these objectives. The prime goal was to prevent conflicts and bring peace and security and protect human rights. Along with that, it was focused on welfare to promote social and economic welfare and protect the environment, right? And also to provide relief, humanitarian aid in case of distress, in case of refugee situation, in case of famines, disasters, etc. These are the stated objectives of the UN. And to achieve these objectives, UN has been provided with 6 principal organs. There are 6 principal organs that make up the UN. You have your UN General Assembly, right? The UNGA. All 193 members are part of UNGA. Currently, you'll be reading about UNGA because as we speak, the UNGA summit is happening every September, in every year September at New York, at the UN headquarters. The UNGA summit will happen, right? So India is also participating, of course. It's headed by the foreign minister this time. So all UN members are part of UN General Assembly. Next, you have the Security Council, the UNSC, which has 15 members. Now, please concentrate on this point. This is the core point, which is important for UN reforms. Why India is pushing for UN reforms? The UNSC has only 15 members. It's an elite group. Out of these 15 members, 5 of them are permanent. The P5 countries whom we have studied throughout our classes. And there are 10 non-permanent members who are elected on a rotational basis. India, for example, has been elected 8 times. We have served 8 terms as a non-permanent member, most recently in 2021 to 2022. We have been elected 8 times as a non-permanent member to the Security Council. All right, recently we served a term from 2021 to 2022. Now the problem here is that the P5 countries have been given the veto power. They can veto any UN resolution. Is that clear? US, UK, France, Russia, and China. They have been given this tremendous power. They represent different parts of the world. But the problem is the power is concentrated in the hands of few, whereas the other countries are left out from such key decision-making powers. When it comes to, let's say, issues like counterterrorism, issues like nuclear disarmament, or deploying troops in another country, deploying UN missions in another country, deploying UN peacekeeping forces, all such major security issues are tackled by the Security Council. But the power to make the decision lies in the hands of the P5 only. None of the other countries have that power. See, at UNGA, resolutions can be brought, debates can be held, but nothing will change without the approval of the P5. That way, UNGA is ineffective, even though it is the most democratic body. UNGA is a truly democratic body because each member has an equal vote at UN General Assembly. UN General Assembly has global representation. All the countries, 193 countries are part of it, and all of them have one equal vote. So it's the most representative of all the bodies and it's democratic. But it is ineffective. Even though it can bring resolutions and discuss issues and debate, it can't take any big decisions without the approval of P5. Because the P5, they have kept all the powers for themselves with the veto. The Security Council has become an elite club. It's an undemocratic institution where only the top 5 countries, the P5 countries, control all the decisions, and even non-permanent members are just for the sake of it. Non-permanent members, they come for 2 years and go. They hold presidency for 1 or 2 months. They can set the agenda, bring some issues, but apart from that, non-permanent members also can't contribute much. The P5, they have misused their veto for geopolitics. They have misused their veto power for their respective geopolitical interests. And this is where India has a problem. India's concern is that UN does not reflect current geopolitical realities. It is an outdated organization. It is rooted in the era of the Second World War. Maybe during Second World War, these were the major powers that were there. But today there are other powers which have come up, like India, Brazil, South Africa, and many others. But they have no representation, no powers at the UN, because only the P5 have retained the veto, and they misuse the veto for their selfish, narrow geopolitical interests. This is the major problem we have. Is that clear? Next, you have the Economic and Social Council, the ECOSOC. It looks after all the welfare programs, all the social welfare and economic welfare programs, including your sustainable development goals. Right? Even the issue of climate change and other issues, they're all dealt with by the ECOSOC. It's mainly focused on promoting socio-economic development, promoting welfare around the world. So it acts like a think tank. It comes out with strategies like sustainable development goals. It sets targets for the world. It provides assistance. It provides funding as well if required to some underdeveloped countries. So the goal of ECOSOC is to focus on socio-economic welfare and development. Then we had Trusteeship Council, which has been closed right now. It does not function anymore. It was set up to look after the trusteeship territories that existed after the World War. There were many colonies which were not ready for independence. Right? Most of these colonies were held by the Axis powers, held by Japan, held by Germany, etc. These colonies weren't ready for full independence. So for until some time, UN directly administered some territories. There were some territories in the Pacific, in Africa, right, and in other parts of the world. These trust territories were kept under the direct rule of the UN for some years before they could be ready for full independence. So today, all these trust territories have transferred. They have transformed into independent sovereign countries. So the Trusteeship Council has nothing to do. It has been closed for many years. It has achieved its objective, which was to prepare the trusteeship territories for their full independence and self-governance. So once the goal was achieved, once all the trust territories became independent, the Trusteeship Council has stopped to function. It does not exist anymore. Next, you have ICJ, International Court of Justice, to settle disputes between the states. If any UN member has a dispute against another UN member, case can be filed here. Even UN bodies can file petitions here to ask for legal advice. ICJ will entertain cases only from member states who are members of UN and from UN bodies. So ICJ is headquartered at The Hague in Netherlands. Is that clear? It consists of 15 judges who are elected. They are elected on a rotational basis from different countries. See, across UN, across all these bodies, there is a geographical quota for different regions. With regard to representation, there is a geographical quota system that's followed for representation. Like some seats are given to North America, some seats are given to Asia, some seats for Africa, some seats for Europe, some seats for South America. Like this region-wise seat distribution is done at most of the UN bodies. All right. Even in ICJ, there is a distribution like this. At most bodies, you have such a distribution. Problem with UNSC is that the P5 countries, right? There is no representation for Africa, no representation for Latin America. This is the problem India has. Entire continents consisting of billion people, right, has been left out. US represents North America, UK, France represent Europe, China represents Asia. There is only one representative from Asia, which is home to billions of people. And Russia represents the Eurasia region, right? So in Asia, there is no adequate representation. China can't be the only representative. Africa has zero representation at Security Council. South America has zero representation. This is the concern India and others have. The geographical quota system and the unequitable representation is the major problem, right? We have a problem with the veto system and the elite nature of the Security Council, where all the powers have been concentrated in the hands of the P5. This is what India wants to reform. Understood? The final organ is the UN Secretariat, which acts as the executive branch of the UN. It is headed by the UN Secretary General. And here as well, Western countries have a domination. When electing the Secretary General, Western countries push their candidate. All right, it's always a Western candidate who wins the election for the Secretary General's post, who heads the UN Secretariat, which is like the executive arm of the UN, which implements all the policies and decisions of the UN. So now what does India have to do with UN? What have we contributed? Why are we pushing for UN reforms? Why do you think it is justified to cause or to carry out UN reforms? India has been a very responsible power. We have contributed immensely to the United Nations. Right from the beginning, right from our independence, we have worked with the UN closely on major global issues. For example, we not only played a role in drafting the UN Charter prior to independence, but later we adopted the goals of the Charter and we have respected the principles that are enshrined in the UN Charter. We have never threatened the sovereignty of another country. We haven't broken international rules and law, right? We have firmly abided by the principles of the UN Charter. From 1950s itself, we started supporting other countries against colonialism, imperialism, and apartheid. Is that clear? We supported the freedom struggle of many colonized countries. India gave direct support to the global South. We were always a leader of the South countries, right? We promoted South-South cooperation. We supported many African nations and former colonies to achieve their independence, to decolonize them. We took a principled stand at the UN against imperialism and colonialism. And later in South Africa, when apartheid was a major concern, right? We took a stand against such racial discrimination. We backed the anti-apartheid movement, supported Nelson Mandela and the African National Congress against racial discrimination of the whites. This itself is a contribution of India to the issues of the global South. It shows how we have supported many developing, underdeveloped countries throughout the last 70 odd years. We spoke out publicly against racial discrimination, against apartheid, gave direct support to anti-apartheid movement, supported the pro-independence movements across colonies in the world. We have championed a grouping called the G77, the Group of 77. The G77 was formed in 1960s. Today it has more than 130 members. All right? It essentially represents South-South cooperation. It brings together the developing, underdeveloped countries of the world, and India has always given leadership to the G77, especially at climate change negotiations. We have given leadership to G77 countries. All right. Recently, right, at Cuba, the G77 meeting is supposed to take place. It's going to be held very soon. And India is a key participant. Even though we might be not representing at the highest level, but India works very closely with G77 and raises the voice of developing underdeveloped countries at the UN, and we give leadership to G77 group. Previously, we had championed the non-aligned movement in the Cold War period. At the UN, we stood for non-alignment. And now we have championed the ideas and concerns of G77 countries. Because G77 consists of some of the most backward and poor countries. They're all underdeveloped or developing nations. So as a like-minded country, we give leadership to the group to raise their voice at the global level. That's another contribution of India, right? To highlight the issues of the underdeveloped countries and developing nations. We have taken many global efforts through UN to tackle global issues, be it tackling piracy, be it pushing for nuclear disarmament or stabilizing the world, protecting human rights. On all these global issues, we have worked with UN very closely. Right? With regard to piracy in the Indian Ocean, we work closely with UN and other partners to counter the threat. We have been very active in climate change negotiations. We played a key role in the Rio Summit, the Paris Summit, and also when Kyoto Protocol was adopted under Climate Change Convention in 1997. It was India which championed the principle of CBDR. You'll study this under environment ecology. CBDR stands for Common but Differentiated Responsibilities. We ensured that developed countries were held accountable for their historical responsibilities, for their historical emissions. We ensured that developing countries shouldn't be burdened with more responsibilities towards climate action. Because it's the developed nations which have largely released emissions. They are the ones responsible for historical emissions. So they should take up more historical responsibilities. This principle is called CBDR, which means fighting climate change is a common goal for all countries. Even developing countries, poor countries will fight climate change. It's common for everyone. But the amount of effort we take, the amount of money we put to climate action should be different. That is what you mean by differentiated responsibilities. More responsibility should be taken by developed countries because they are the ones who have polluted. They are the ones who have released more emissions and contributed to climate change. Whereas developing, underdeveloped countries should take smaller responsibilities, which is matching with their emissions. We championed this principle with other countries, with G77 and China. It was India which championed the CBDR principle when Kyoto Protocol was signed in 1997. We played a very big role in finalizing the Paris Agreement, which is the current climate agreement. We have countered terrorism through UN, and we have proposed a convention called CCIT Convention. We are going to study this in detail under internal security. Under the terrorism chapter, I'll explain what is the CCIT Convention. India has proposed a global convention to counter terrorism, but unfortunately, it hasn't got enough support. It's not adopted. There are some issues with it. There are some concerns with this convention proposed by India, right? But it has not been adopted. Other countries haven't given enough support. But however, we keep pushing for its adoption even today. It was proposed in 1996. All right, India proposed this CCIT convention to counter terrorism of all forms, especially state-sponsored terrorism. But due to lack of support from others, it has not been adopted. But it does mark a contribution of India to counter terrorism. We have effectively used the sanctions committee, the 1267 sanctions committee, which we studied under Pakistan and China, to designate terrorists like Masood Azhar. Even though China blocks our efforts to protect Pakistan, we have used the sanctions committee to designate these terrorists as global terrorists to counter terrorism by working with others. Right? Upon this, India has been a major troop contributing country to UN peacekeeping forces. India is one of the biggest contributor of troops, along with Bangladesh, Pakistan, and few other countries. Now, one of our concern is that these peacekeeping forces, which are deployed in countries like Democratic Republic of Congo and other conflict zones, they face a number of threats. Recently, some Indian troops have been killed who are part of the UN peacekeeping missions. These UN peacekeepers, they're also called the blue helmets. They use the blue color and the logo of the UN, right? They're essentially peacekeeping forces stabilizing the region where there is a civil war or a conflict going on. India has contributed at least 2 lakh troops in the last 70 years. And almost 179 Indian troops have been killed in UN missions abroad. So India has taken the big impact, the big loss. Recently, in Democratic Republic of Congo, 2 BSF Jawans of India were killed who were part of the UN peacekeeping mission. They were targeted by a rebel group and they got killed. Now, our concern is that even though we are the largest troop contributors, right, we are losing our soldiers on the ground in these peacekeeping missions. We don't have decision-making powers regarding peacekeeping forces. All decisions regarding the deployment, safety, and protection of peacekeeping forces is made by the P5 countries through UN Security Council. This is not fair. Troop contributing countries like India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, and others, they should also get a say. We should have a say on how our troops are deployed. Eventually, it is our people who might get killed. We are contributing to stabilize the world as part of our obligation, but P5 countries take all the decisions because they have complete control over peacekeeping forces. This is another major issue based on which India is pushing for UN reforms. So one is over the outdated nature of the structure of the UN, how P5 countries have formed an elite club, how they have the veto power, how UNGA has been sidelined, right? How it does not reflect current geopolitical realities. And the other major issue is that how we don't get any say on the safety and deployment of peacekeeping forces, right? Even though we are the largest troop contributing country, we are sidelined because all the decisions are taken by the P5. We have even pushed for a nuclear weapons convention. Then Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi, he proposed a nuclear weapons convention to eliminate nuclear weapons around the world. It was in line with nuclear disarmament. India is committed to nuclear disarmament, but we want others to work together. If all countries agree, if all the nuclear states agree, we are open for nuclear disarmament. That was a position we had taken. So Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi pushed for a nuclear weapons convention, like chemical weapons and biological weapons convention, but it didn't get enough support and it wasn't adopted. India has done a lot at the UN to promote peace, stability, and human rights. We have contributed to welfare, contributed to climate change. We have even contributed to strengthening democracy by establishing the UN Democracy Fund in 2005. Then Prime Minister Manmohan Singh took the initiative to set up a democracy fund at the UN through which we have funded democratic institutions around the world to strengthen democracy around the world. So we have truly made a big contribution to the UN in many ways, be it for peace and security, for climate change, for welfare, for human rights. In every possible way, India has worked with the UN, but in return, we haven't got what we want. India has clearly said that UN is outdated. The problem is with its structure, problem is with its governance. This is where India has a problem. India's position is that it does not reflect current geopolitical realities. It does not show the current geopolitical realities of the world. All the powers are cornered by P5 through their veto, and UNSC takes all the big decisions by sidelining the other bodies of UN. Then also with regard to the geographical representation, the quota system which is there, it is not fair, it's not equitable that many regions are left behind. Many regions have inadequate representation. Europe has almost 3 countries representing the region at UNSC, whereas Asia has only 1. Africa and Latin America have 0. This is not fair. The quota system is also not fair. So on all these issues, we are pushing for reforms of the UN. And as we have studied in previous classes, we have formed a grouping for this called the G4. Like-minded countries such as Brazil, Japan, Germany, they have aligned with India to form the G4 to push for reforms of the UN. They're all seeking a permanent seat at Security Council, and they want concrete reforms to be initiated. But the regional rivals of G4, they have formed a counter group called Coffee Club to oppose the reforms of UN, to oppose the entry of these countries as permanent members. Because if India becomes a permanent member, eventually, Pakistan feels threatened in the region, right? India would dominate in the region. Pakistan feels threatened by it. Similarly, Italy feels threatened by Germany. South Korea and Argentina, they feel threatened by Japan and Brazil, respectively, right? The regional rivals of G4, they have formed Coffee Club to oppose UN reforms, to oppose the entry of G4 countries into UNSC. So there is a major roadblock here. In fact, out of the P5, US, UK, France, and Russia, they have given verbal support at least. Verbally, they have said that they agree that UNSC has to be expanded. Verbally, they have supported India. Verbally, they have said that India should be on the permanent seat of the Security Council. These 4 countries have said that. But China is strongly opposed to any reform. Obviously, China doesn't want India or Japan, the rivals of China, to become permanent members. All right? See, even the other countries, what they have promised, it's only verbal support. There has been no concrete text-based negotiation. No country has taken the initiative. No P5 member have taken the initiative to initiate a text-based negotiation. See, what's the point of making verbal promises? It's like your manager promising you a hike verbally, right? Your hike is not guaranteed unless and until it's on paper, unless and until you get a mail confirming that you have got an appraisal, right? It's like that. US, Russia, France, and UK, they verbally said that India should be there, that we are ready to support UN reforms. But this is all fake. None of them are interested in reforming the UN because they know the power of veto. They want to keep the veto limited to themselves because they can use it for their geopolitical interests. None of them have taken the initiative to introduce the resolutions needed at UNSC. Because see, the irony is that these reforms over question of veto, membership, representation, etc., these reforms will not happen without the approval of the P5. That is the irony. The structure is such that if UN has to be reformed, if the structure has to change, if new permanent members have to be added, P5 countries have to approve one such resolution. Now the point is, why will they approve it? They have a vested interest. They want to keep the veto to themselves. They don't want to allow new members. So they're not initiating any text-based negotiations. This has been India's demand. We have been pushing it from 30 years. Verbal promises are made, verbal discussions are held, but nothing is documented on paper. There is no text-based negotiation which is happening, and this is what India is insisting. We want the other countries to support the G4 countries and push for concrete text-based negotiations so that we can make progress and introduce a resolution at UNSC and UNGA, and it should get majority support. At UNGA, you need 2/3 support. You need at least 2/3 support, but at UNSC, all P5 countries have to approve. Without that, reforms will not happen. That is the process, the constitutional process that exists. All right? So this is where we are facing a hurdle, and hence UN reforms has hit a stalemate from 30 years. But we don't give up on this because the UN does play a critical role in global geopolitics. It may be ineffective, right? It is ineffective because the P5 countries are playing geopolitics with it. That's why it can't resolve the crisis in Afghanistan, the crisis in Sudan, the crisis in Nigeria. It can't tackle terrorism effectively because UN, when it comes to security issues, it is very ineffective. But with regard to welfare, with regard to social and economic development like sustainable development goals, tackling climate change, achieving cooperation in some issues, that is where UN can play a impactful role. It has a contribution to make. But India's concern is that there should be fair and equitable representation, right? This is why we are pushing for reforms of the UN, and we want all countries to support, especially the P5. Because without support of P5, reforms cannot happen as they have the veto right. Is that clear? For reforms to be approved, right? The resolution has to be supported by 2/3 majority in UN General Assembly and approved by all P5 countries of Security Council. That is the problem, that is the hurdle that we are facing right now. So this completes my detailed discussion of international relations. Now, before we wind up, before we close this syllabus, I want to mention two important points. One is regarding BRICS, the BRICS grouping, and the other is regarding G20. All right, let's look at these 2 points I want to bring up, and then we can close the session for today. So what is BRICS? BRICS essentially is a grouping of emerging economies. The idea of such a group called BRIC was proposed by an investment banker called Jim O'Neill of Goldman Sachs. Back in 2003, Jim O'Neill was an investment banker, a top head of the Goldman Sachs investment banking firm. So he brought out a research paper and he pointed that the BRIC countries have the greatest economic potential. He said these are the emerging economies of the world. That is Brazil, Russia, India, China. Based on this concept that Jim O'Neill had proposed, in 2006, the foreign ministers of BRIC countries, they had a meeting because they had common issues against the developed countries. Emerging economies obviously had issues with developed countries, especially with regard to how World Bank and IMF were being managed. Just like UN has been misused by P5 countries, World Bank and IMF has been dominated by Western countries. World Bank has been dominated by the US. IMF has been dominated by European Union. Even though emerging economies also contribute to World Bank and IMF, their voting share has not changed. Voting share has not seen changes. These Western countries have held most of the voting powers to themselves. That is how they largely control the global financial architecture through World Bank and IMF. So BRIC countries always had a concern about this, about how the global economy, global financial architecture is managed. So based on the idea of Jim O'Neill of BRIC countries working together, the first foreign ministers meeting was held in 2006. This led to the first summit at Yekaterinburg in Russia. At Yekaterinburg in Russia, the first BRICS summit was held. It included only 4 countries, the BRIC countries: Brazil, Russia, India, China. South Africa was still not part of it. It was only in 2010 that South Africa was also included. South Africa joined the grouping. Because see, in 2008, 2009, the world faced a massive economic crisis, a global recession. There was a crisis in the American market, especially in the housing market. There were frauds that were committed in the US economy that included American institutions like the Federal Reserve, then American investment banking firms, right? Then top American stockbrokers, traders, the rating agencies of US. They had colluded to pull off a big scam that led to the collapse of the housing market, the subprime crisis in the US housing market. This triggered a contagion, a spreading economic crisis that brought down many banks in the US. It destabilized the American economy and devastated the global economy. It pushed the global economy into a severe recession. And it was all because of mismanagement by the US and mismanagement by World Bank and IMF, which are dominated by Western countries. Similarly, in Eurozone countries were destabilized. Countries like Portugal, Spain, then Italy, Ireland, they all faced a major economic crisis in 2009-2010, the Eurozone crisis. Even there was mismanagement on the part of IMF and European Central Bank. So BRIC countries had a problem with US and European Union, how they were managing World Bank, IMF and European Central Bank. Because this was affecting everyone. The recession triggered in US affected India, affected Russia, affected China. So they came together to counter the Western domination and they formed the BRIC in 2009 and added South Africa in the second summit in 2010. Then during the Fortaleza summit in Brazil in 2014, they established the New Development Bank and the Contingent Reserve Arrangement. This is the biggest initiative of the BRIC grouping. Now with South Africa's inclusion, it had become BRICS, right? They meet every year, the leaders meet, and there are many ministerial meetings as well. And they finally declared at Fortaleza summit in Brazil that they are establishing two institutions to reform the global financial system. One is New Development Bank, or NDB, to counter the World Bank. Just like World Bank provides loans and investments for infrastructure projects and development projects, NDB also performs the same role for BRICS countries. It will be a financial institution providing for investments, loans, and other funds for development initiatives, for transport connectivity projects, for welfare programs, for critical infrastructure projects, etc. Then to counter the IMF, the CRA, Contingent Reserve Arrangement, was established. See, even with IMF, the problem is that IMF always imposes conditions when it is helping out a country facing a crisis. India itself is a victim of that. In 91, when we faced balance of payments crisis, we took help from IMF. Just like Sri Lanka, Pakistan are asking for IMF help right now. Even we had taken help from IMF. Problem is, when you take assistance from IMF, you have to agree to their conditions. IMF conditions threaten our economic sovereignty. It helps developed countries. It helps US and European countries to access our market in a better way. It will benefit their companies, their governments. It compromises our economic sovereignty. That is why developing nations always have a problem with the way IMF functions. Is that clear? If you take support from IMF, you have to devalue your currency. You have to carry out economic reforms, open up your economy, and allow foreign competition. These are decisions a country should make on its own, not by force. But IMF forces it on other countries when they are facing a crisis, or else IMF will not give them support. So developing countries have a problem with this. That is why, to counter IMF, they set up CRA, Contingent Reserve Arrangement. So New Development Bank and CRA have become effective counters to World Bank and IMF, and today they are providing support not just to BRICS countries, to many other countries as well. NDB has become a very good financial institution. It's based out of China. It's headquartered in China, but it has already given billions of dollars in funding for key projects, including projects in India. And all the countries have an equal share, equal voting share. That is the unique aspect about these institutions. Unlike the unequal voting share that you see at World Bank and IMF, where Western countries have held most of the voting share to themselves, we have given equal voting share to all of them, to all the member countries. So these countries have today taken a very big step in the latest BRICS summit. In the latest BRICS summit that was held, they have expanded the group, and that is the point I wanted to highlight. In the 2023 summit that happened just a few weeks ago, there is a major expansion of BRICS which has been approved. and new members are being added. 6 members have been approved. Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Iran from West Asia. Egypt and Ethiopia from Africa. And Argentina from South America. These are the 6 new members who are joining BRICS. And this will further increase the profile of BRICS. Many more countries are interested. You might see even more expansion in the coming years. Right now, 3 West Asian powers, 3 prominent West Asian powers, Saudi, UAE, and Iran, have been approved for membership. 2 major African powers, Egypt and Ethiopia. Egypt plays a big role in West Asia as well. These 2 African countries have been added. And Argentina, a major South American economy and a G20 member, has been added into BRICS. This recent expansion of BRICS is the biggest development. That is why the group is becoming more and more prominent. It is seen as an effective counter to the Western dominance of the global financial architecture. If the global financial architecture was dominated by the West, now the BRICS is effectively countering this dominance. Right? This is where the significance of BRICS lies. All right, India plays a very important role as a BRICS member, and here as well we face a challenge, a dilemma of balancing Russia with Western countries. We are working with China as well through BRICS, right? Even though we have tensions and border dispute, we are working with Russia, and Western countries have a problem with this approach of India. It does create a problem for us, but we do balance this quite well. We work with BRICS as well, we work with Western countries as well. But the expansion of BRICS is the biggest development, along with the successful establishment of new development bank and contingent reserve arrangement. Now coming to G20. The G20 is actually related to this topic. The G20 was formed in 1999 as a grouping of finance ministers and governors of central banks. The top 20 economies came together following the Asian financial crisis. Following the Asian financial crisis, right, the Asian economies from Japan to Southeast Asia, they went through a major crisis in 98-99. It destabilized the global economy. So to build better coordination between the top 20 economies of the world, this group was formed in 1999, involving the finance ministers of these countries and the governors of the central banks of these countries. But the group didn't get much attention. After a few meetings, it didn't get much traction. But the 2008-2009 crisis, the global recession, this is what really gave a push to G20. Following this, the first G20 summit was held at the level of leaders. Following this major crisis that pushed the global economy into a recession, right? The top 20 economies came together with their prime ministers, presidents coming together to discuss the global economic issues. And today, the group not only deals with economic issues, it also deals with strategic and geopolitical issues. Over a period of time, the importance of G20 has grown, right? And as of now, the topic becomes very relevant for us, not just with regard to the role of G20 countries in managing the global economy, but also how they deal with global geopolitical and strategic issues and problems. Right? The topic is very relevant because India held the presidency of G20 for 2023. After last year's Bali summit in Indonesia, we took the presidency from Indonesia. And since last year, India organized several ministerial meetings and official meetings on many key issues around the country. We led the world during a very difficult period. Right now, we are facing economic challenges created by the pandemic, created by the Russia-Ukraine war. in such a difficult environment where there is a lot of tensions and hostility, India led the G20 quite efficiently, and we organized multiple meetings throughout the year. Throughout the last 1 year, since we took over G20 presidency, we set the agenda. India set the agenda on major issues from cryptocurrency regulation to tackling money laundering, tackling terrorism, promoting cultural ties, right? In all these areas, including climate change, sustainable development, improving connectivity, in all these areas, India set the agenda through various meetings organized throughout the year. And finally, we organized a successful G20 summit. I'm sure all of you would have seen the visuals, the gathering of all the leaders, and we succeeded in working out the New Delhi Declaration as well. Despite the divisions amongst the members, we convinced all of them. We managed to convince the rival factions. We convinced Russia and China and Western countries to agree to a common statement, and we brought out a joint statement. This itself is a big success because it's not easy to achieve a joint statement at G20, that too when you have so many difficult issues going on. Russia-Ukraine war is the major issue, right? How there is a division between Western countries and Russia and China, right? This has become a major divide. And India managed to overcome the divide. We leveraged our independent foreign policy with all these partners, worked with them, and successfully brought out a joint statement, which is called the New Delhi Declaration. Now, the biggest development at the G20 summit was that there were some big initiatives that were announced with India's leadership. Is that clear? Under India's leadership, we not only achieved a successful outcome and brought out a joint statement, that is the New Delhi Declaration, but we addressed some of the pressing issues, including the Russia-Ukraine war, the economic challenges, the issues of climate change. Many such issues have been addressed, and the New Delhi Declaration marks a successful outcome for Indian diplomacy. So during the summit, there were other initiatives announced on the side, right? India used this opportunity to bring out some new initiatives. And one of the biggest announcement was the IMEC corridor, India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor. A new transport corridor has been proposed to link India with Middle East and Europe. This project will be part of the PGII of G7. G7 countries have an initiative called Partnership for Global Infrastructure Investment. This is seen as a counter to China's Belt and Road Initiative. If China has the Global Belt and Road Initiative, G7 countries have countered it by launching PGII, Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investment. So as part of this, some of the countries here, that is India, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, then France and Germany, and even Italy. These countries launched this mega initiative. It will also include Jordan. Israel will be a key component, Greece, and few other countries. This initiative has been supported by US. US was also part of the launch of the IMEC corridor. This connectivity will transform the region by providing maritime connection and also rail connection between these countries. It will basically connect the west coast of India through Arabian Sea with West Asian ports in Saudi Arabia and UAE. From here, there will be railway links via West Asian countries, via Saudi Arabia, to connect with Jordan and Israel to reach the strategic Haifa port in Israel, which is controlled by India's Adani Group. All right, a railway link will be formed from UAE and Saudi Arabia to transport the goods through Jordan and Israel to bring it to Haifa port. From here, the goods will be transported through the Mediterranean Sea to reach the Piraeus port in Greece and other key ports of Italy and France in the Southern Europe region, in the Mediterranean region. It will create a shorter, more reliable route between India and Europe, and it will drive economic activities between these countries. They're all key important economic strategic partners of each other, and IMEC corridor has great potential to transform the region. It's not just about maritime and railway connectivity. It will include pipelines as well. Pipelines for electricity, pipelines for data, and even oil. It's not just about building railway lines and connecting the ports, etc. It's not just about moving goods physically. Even data connectivity, connecting our electricity grids is a priority, with these pipelines being laid to link India with Middle East and Europe. Is that clear? This is one big initiative that was announced by all these countries in collaboration with all of them. And even Jordan, Israel, Greece will be a part of it. All right. The other big initiative we announced was the Global Biofuels Alliance. Under the leadership of India, Brazil, and the United States. We brought other like-minded countries such as Bangladesh, UAE, Italy, then Argentina, Mauritius, and even South Africa. These countries together, with support of 19 countries in total and 12 international organizations, the Global Biofuel Alliance has been launched. So non-G20 members are also part of it. The guest countries like Bangladesh, UAE, who are invited by India, they're also part of this ambitious initiative. The focus is to promote 2G ethanol, promote the production and adoption of second generation biofuel, which is produced from agricultural waste, in order to sustainably reduce emissions. See, not all biofuels are sustainable. Like first generation biofuel, 1G ethanol, is not sustainable. It's produced from food commodities like sugarcane and other food commodities which are good for consumption. That will divert food from the food market, threatening food security. It could harm the environment as well, as farmers are incentivized to grow crops for biofuels. So the Global Biofuel Alliance is focusing on second generation ethanol produced only from waste, from agricultural waste. The rotten crops, the food crops which are going to waste, only they will be diverted for biofuel production. And this is environmentally sustainable, economically sustainable. It does not disrupt or threaten food security. So by blending ethanol with petrol and diesel, we can make the fuel cleaner to reduce emissions and tackle pollution as well, and reduce import bills. This major alliance has been launched, the Global Biofuels Alliance, with the leadership of India, Brazil, and US, along with these countries. And many more countries have shown interest. Around 19 countries are looking to participate. The next big achievement was the membership of African Union into G20. This was entirely India's initiative. India, which has championed the Global South. We even organized the Global South Summit. The Voice of Global South Summit was organized by India before the G20 summit, where we brought all Global South countries together under India's leadership. All the developing, underdeveloped countries were united a few months ago. And we proposed a membership for African Union to represent African countries at the G20. This proposal of India was accepted by all the members, and African Union was admitted as a new member at this G20 summit. These are the big achievements of India at the G20 summit, along with bringing out a successful joint statement, that is the New Delhi Declaration. Is that clear? In a difficult world, India has navigated the complex geopolitics, balanced the relations between Russia, China, and Western countries, convinced all of them to a common point, and we have managed to bring out a declaration. So G20 summit was a big success for India. It has established India's role as a pivotal power that can act as a negotiator, that can bring various rivals together and bring out peace in the world, bring out a consensus on conflicted issues or difficult issues in the world, right? This is the biggest outcome of the summit, along with all the other initiatives that were launched parallelly. Is that clear? So this is one point I wanted to bring out about BRICS and G20. So on this note, I would like to wind up my discussion. Trust me, we have covered a good majority of the syllabus. Most of the key topics, we have covered it in detail. Now it is all about current affairs. There are many more organizations, treaties, and conventions. As I told you, there are hundreds of them. It's impossible to cover them in class. It's impossible for you to read about all conventions and organizations. So what should we do? You can't leave. You can't ignore this topic. What you have to do is, in current affairs, in our webinars, in our magazines, in our daily analysis, we will pick out the important organizations, conventions, and treaties that are in news. Those which are in news in the last 1 to 2 years, they become important for the exam. So maybe in total, you will have around 20 organizations, around 10, 15 treaties and conventions. Those are the ones which are important. That is why we have to cover that in current affairs, not in the static part. If we try to do that in the static part, we will make a big mistake. I want you guys to understand this as well. Even when you're preparing, right? Prepare for the static part separately till what I have covered. Everything else should come from current affairs. If you try to read about every organization that is there, you are going to waste your time. You will lose marks at the end of it. Don't do that. Focus only on those international bodies and treaties and conventions which are in the news in last 1 year, 1.5 years, right? So we will help you there with our webinars, with our daily analysis and magazines. Look out for this content, the current affairs content. So from the static part, we have covered everything along with our major relations, including the current affairs part of it. We have covered many groupings and organizations, including UN, several regional bodies, etc. So I'll take a final look at any doubts, any questions, and then we can close the session for today. Abhijit is asking, what are the challenges India faces regarding its foreign policy of strategic autonomy? The biggest challenge, as I told you, is balancing different interests. When we have an independent foreign policy, when we don't align with one country or one power, balancing different powers, balancing our ties between different rivals becomes the biggest challenge. Prerna is asking, any challenge in the IMEC corridor? To implement the IMEC corridor, there are challenges. Because see, creating the railway link in Middle East is not going to be easy. The technology, the execution of the infrastructure project will be challenging. Also, ties between Saudi Arabia and Israel is a concern. Saudi and Israel don't have ties. They don't have official relations. We discussed that, right? So to execute this IMEC corridor project, Saudi-Israel relations have to be established. So that depends on geopolitics of the region with regard to Palestinian issue. Then there are other concerns, funding, right? Who will contribute how much? And what will be the share for different countries? So that is a concern. So there are some issues, but we will get more clarity because very soon the details regarding IMEC corridor will be brought out by the concerned countries. Rashida is asking, any topic in news is enough or only do the static part? See, cover the static part, cover whatever I have discussed in class, right? I have discussed not only static part, but current affairs as well. Lot of current affairs. Apart from that, only for other organizations, treaties, conventions, focus more on current affairs. So it's a mix of both static and current affairs. Aniket is asking, why developed nations don't contribute more to peacekeeping forces? That's because they don't want to risk their soldiers in these conflicts, right? They readily get troops from developing nations like India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, because developing nations contribute troops to promote their image. They want to promote human rights. They want to be seen as a major global player. So developing nations like India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Kenya, Nigeria, Ethiopia, Philippines, they all contribute troops because they want to build their image. Developed countries are not bothered. They don't care about it. P5 countries don't contribute troops to peacekeeping forces. They don't risk their soldiers for these unnecessary conflicts. That is the discrepancy here. That is the unfairness with peacekeeping forces. Atharv is asking, daily analysis is important or webinar? Both are important. Daily analysis will help you cover the newspaper every day, right? And webinars will help you in the weekly revision. So both are equally important. Devansh says China has the sole authority in decision making for Belt and Road Initiative. And in IMEC, multiple powers are required to have consensus. That is the strength of IMEC. See, Belt and Road Initiative is only China's initiative. It is designed only to benefit China. I told you it's not mutually beneficial. It has pushed many countries into a debt trap. And in Belt and Road Initiative, China is taking all the big decisions, enforcing it on other countries. IMEC corridor is not like that. IMEC corridor brings all these countries together and they will collectively work together to the mutual benefit of everyone. That is the big difference between IMEC and Belt and Road Initiative. That is why experts are seeing IMEC as a counter to China's Belt and Road Initiative. Jhansi Rani is asking, what are the various dimensions to approach India's relations with other countries? See, whenever you study our ties with other countries, focus on few basic things. What is the historical background, the historical relationship? Economic relations, any disputes, any areas of cooperation, any areas of conflict. These 4, 5, right? And cultural ties. These are the focus areas. These are the priorities when it comes to any diplomatic relationship. All right. So guys, these were the questions. I hope you guys have liked the classes for IR. It's a very big subject. Trust me, you can teach this for 2 years if you want. But we have to make it concise. What is needed for the exam, that has to be discussed and covered. So we've done our best to cover all the key topics as comprehensively as possible, right? So do let me know how it went, and we'll see you again in internal security. There are many related topics like money laundering, Khalistan movement, terrorism, right? All those topics will repeat again. And that is where we'll get even more details in internal security, where there is a connection with IR. Is that clear? So we'll see you again in the future classes. Till then, take care, all the best, prepare well, and do let me know how the classes went. That's it from my side. Thanks for watching. Have a good day.